Welcome to the Region Free Gamers podcast. Today, don't forget that road pass, don't forget that passport, and bring along some Mazetta, cause that diamond armor ain't cheap. Hello everyone, welcome to the Region Free Gamers podcast, the podcast that's fluent in gaming. My name's Paul, and I'll be your host for today's show. And look, I know I say this every time, but man, I am super hyped for today's show. Today we're going over my favorite game of all time, Phantasy Star. But before we get to it, I brought co-hosts with me. Out of the mighty state of Rhode Island, by way of Puerto Rico, Arnaldo.
This one's for all the people who thought they knew what our first Sega episode was going to be about.
And sitting next to me, because today I'm actually recording in Toronto instead of my frigid Yukon basement, my good buddy Mike.
Hey, very excited to be here. I'm Mike, and I play video games.
How dare you? Although, to be fair, he replaced the word play with, or like with play, so his little intro is a little different than mine.
Mixed it. No,
mixed it up.
And hey everyone, as always, if you enjoy the show, tell a friend, and don't forget to leave us a rating and review on the Apple Podcasts app. Our show isn't brought to you by any sponsors. We're just some guys having a good time talking about games, so we really rely on our listeners to help us get the word out, and hey, we appreciate the support we get from you all.
Yeah, so that maybe one day it will be brought to you by a sponsor.
Maybe. I mean, it's weird, dude, because this isn't my day job. I don't think I'm ever going to care if we have sponsors.
Right.
That's fair point. That's fair point.
Yeah, like I think this might actually be unsponsored forever. And then smash cut to 2 years later, there's a sponsor, and we play this clip of me saying we're never going to be sponsored.
Yeah, perfectly. Yeah.
Anyhow, so yeah, before we get to Phantasy Star, I don't know, Arnie, I think it's appropriate we get to know Mike a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, Mike, I mean, I hope that you thought of some things to talk about.
I did, yeah.
Okay, cool.
I thought of a few things, yeah.
He has a prepared statement.
Yeah.
I'm not being held here against my will.
I'm definitely under a microscope at this point. Okay, cool. So, do you guys even say how old you are in this thing?
Sure, if you want.
So I'm 39. That breaks me, like, I'm the oldie?
No, I am. I still out old you.
Oh, anyway, so, super stoked to be here and fan of the podcast, and basically, I've been a lifelong gamer in a family of gamers. I'm the third of four brothers, and so I had two older brothers, and so our parents realized as we were pretty young that we kind of fell in love with video games and arcades. Started off, we cut our teeth on the Atari 2600, otherwise known as the VCS, played Frostbite and completely fell in love. We sort of graduated to ColecoVision. When we made the big step to 8-bit, it was the Sega Master System, and we're pretty much all Sega kids for life. I think some of us, I mean, not that we don't appreciate Nintendo, but I definitely consider myself still pretty much a Sega kid. So Master System was sort of the seminal console, and was really into Wonder Boys, was really into Zillion, Golvalius, Phantasy Star, obviously we're going to talk about later. 16-bit went on to the Genesis and the Mega Drive. So still pretty loyal to Sega, but at that point we did buy a NES. Then, so we were like late bloomers to the NES, and so we kind of swooped in like vultures and basically bought out everything for cheap when it went on sale.
Yeah.
And that was like that era where, I don't know if you guys ever went through that, where like relatives would just be like, oh, they like video games, for Christmas, I guess we'll get, like, we only ever got stuff at Christmas.
Yeah.
And so at Christmas we would get like deluge with games. And I remember one year we got Chessmaster and we got Chessmaster, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, Heroes of the Lance.
Oh, that's pretty sweet.
No, dude, it's not.
Oh my god, does Arnie not know?
No, he doesn't know.
I have not played it. I've heard of it.
Okay,
But
and,
I gotta think, like, I'm trying to think back, like, when I was a kid, if I saw, like, the cover for that game, I'd be like, oh, this is gonna be sweet.
Oh, it's rad.
Dude, the
Oh, yeah.
cover is
Rad.
like auto buy.
It's just, you know.
That cover, my sister actually reproduced that cover on a canvas.
Oh, that's
Oh,
sick.
really?
That picture of the red dragon, that's the one
Yeah.
we're talking about, right?
I think
No,
so.
no.
No?
No,
No, it's the
AD&D
one with
would've
the
had-
beholder, isn't it?
Oh, see, now I don't know anymore.
Let me look
AD&D,
it up.
no, sorry, Dragonlance. It was Dragonlance. So
Yeah.
I thought it just had the posse of them.
You might
know,
be
like
right.
Iceland
Yeah,
and
yeah. I'm thinking
all
because
those dudes.
I'm thinking of the other Dragonlance cover with the red dragon breathing fire out,
Oh, right.
which,
yeah,
by the
yeah,
way,
yeah.
would have been a way cooler
Oh,
cover.
sick. Yeah, yeah.
But
absolutely.
anyway, whatever.
But anyway, back to basics. But like we were getting all this stuff like that at the time, and so we played a lot of really random games. That's kind of how I fell in love with Wolverine on Nest. I love Wolverine on Nest. It's so good. It's not, but it's awesome. So never had a SNES. Like we never got one. I don't have too much of an attachment to it. Although a lot of the Super Famicom stuff I find really fascinating. And then we kind of sort of fell out of it for a while. Like we didn't have a Sega CD. We didn't get the 32X. But then we got a PlayStation.
Both sound choices.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, for sure.
And then we got a PlayStation, and then kind of from then on, played everything on the PlayStation,
Gotcha.
pretty much. And then missed the Saturn. That was when we missed the Saturn, missed like the 3DO, the Jaguar, all that stuff. We were like,
You
okay,
missed the Jaguar.
Yeah, no, we missed the Jag.
Oh,
We didn't
my
get into
God.
Jag. We didn't do the math. And and then PS2, that was sort of the first console I bought with my own money. And that was like right around when I was in college and completely flipped out. And from then on, I was buying, I got the GameCube, got the Xbox, got the Wii, like into the later generations. The only consoles that I don't have like right now, and I know this is going to get me in a little bit of hot water because I know we got some fans here, but the Wii U and the Switch, both don't have this. I don't know.
Dude, nobody's gonna shit on you for not buying the Wii U.
Like, I don't know. Maybe not, like you guys seem pretty in it. I mean, I know you guys tout the Switch pretty hard.
Yeah, we're definitely stands for the Switch, and rightfully so, dude. It's a great little system. But like, do you plan on getting it, or is it just kind of like,
I don't know,
not interested?
I kind of dabble with it. I think the only reason I would get it, and like this is again contentious, but the only reason I would get it was for specific indie stuff that might come out for it that I might not be able to get. Like there's some really cool little games coming out for the Switch that are just kind of great, and I'd love to play those. But that's the thing is that, the big three and kind of like the dynasties, I'm just not particularly interested in. And so it always makes it a bit of a tough sell.
And the thing is, like, if you didn't grow up with an NES, which is to say you did, but you grew up with an NES with
not
bad
in the
games.
same way, no.
And you didn't grow up with an SNES, then it's like, how excited am I to play Metroid on the Switch?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Exactly.
not really that much.
Yeah.
And that goes for other stuff. And like, I mean, Mario Odyssey, for example, like, I know Ozzy said it was his game of the year back in 2017. So did Masa. And I enjoyed it, but it's like, I just don't have that attachment to Mario that everyone else does. And presumably you're like that too, right?
No, yeah. I mean, it's kind of the same. Like, obviously we played the first three on Nintendo and they're great. Like, they're super fun and we really enjoyed them. But, again, I think something like Mario World would have been the clincher. Like, that would have been the game that if I'd really gotten into that and really played it, I think it would have made me a convert for life.
Yeah.
But because we didn't sort of go through that process, and same thing with Mario 64, like it was easier for us to just sort of bounce off it. And I think, but again, it's depending on the brother, to be honest. Like, my oldest brother had an N64, like that was his, and he played the crap out of Mario 64 and loved it. And so it's weird, and on the GameCube as well, my oldest brother was really into Sunshine, and, and I played Galaxy. I was really into Galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, it just I just got to this point where I was like, these are really cool and I really respect them, but it's just, I don't know. It doesn't sort of tick that box.
And for me, it's like, this is the issue I have, it's just with platformers in general. Like, I can't get into platformers like I used to.
I feel you on
Not
that
anymore,
one.
yeah. I mean, the closest thing, but it's not even really a platformer, is Dead Cells. Like, I was obsessed with Dead Cells.
It's a great game.
But I mean, you can't even really call it a platform. It's an action game, and every once in a while you jump onto a platform.
Yep. And
the platforming is also like very, very forgiving in that game. Like, you're never gonna die in that game because you couldn't make a jump.
Yeah, I think platformers are really interesting now because it seems to be in this zone of the platforming itself is the main draw, and like turning that difficulty up on it is sort of like the compelling loop now. Whereas, we sort of all went through that time, like the golden age of platformers, where it wasn't really about that. Like, I mean, when you think of like to me, the golden age of platformers, like the stuff that I really love the most is all the stuff on PS2, like Ratchet and Clank and Jak and Daxter and the Sly Cooper series. And going back a little further, you could get into Spyro and stuff like that. And those, I mean, there was a little bit of challenge, but it was really much more about an immersive atmosphere and color and kind of fun and sort of like vibrant characters and like, like really, really fulfilling feedback when you collect a bolt or something. And I think the only game to kind of really nail that recently, because there are games that are trying to do it now, like Hat in Time.
Yeah,
and stuff.
That's the one I was gonna bring up. I've heard that one really captures that sort of spirit.
Mm-hmm. And like Hat in Time looks great, and Ukulele I think tried, but like I don't think really succeeded. But even Hat in Time, like when I look at it, there's a certain. It's not to knock the game. I haven't given it a fair shake yet, but there's a level of busyness to it. There's a level of like clutter in the levels themselves. And when you go back to stuff if you go back to stuff like Jak and Daxter 1, especially in Ratchet and Clank 1, you're going to be blown away by how spacious it is, by like how wide open. There's no clutter. It's just, it's like, it's a space and there's enemies and you kill them and you collect things. Like, it's really interesting how like everything has kind of become more condensed. I think the only game that I think recently got that feeling back for me was the last Sly Cooper game, was Thieves in Time, which is actually one of my top 10. Like it's not done by Sucker Punch. It's actually done by another team. It's a great story actually. Like they actually fought, like in a nutshell, they actually fought to get it from Sony, but Sony were like, no. And they created a tech demo. They were like, okay, cool. We'll make this tech demo about another game. Yeah. And they actually just made a tech demo of Sly. And they were like, here you go. And apparently they played that and were like, oh, all right, you got it. And and then they got sort of Sucker Punch's blessing and they were like, all right, let's do it. And it's really recommended. Like if you're into the older games, like I think it's the Doom 2016 of sort of platformers in the sense that
interesting.
It just like takes everything. But
so like so dialing it back then, you mentioned it's one of your top 10. What would you say, like, for example, like your top 5 favorite games are? And it doesn't have to be in any order and you don't have to think too hard. Just throw them out there.
It's funny. I was thinking about this. I think,
but we're totally going to judge you. So,
for sure. Absolutely. Dead Space 2. I think is up there. A lot of people would go with Dead Space. I know, because they go, oh, that's the slower one. It's the one that's more like RE4. But Dead Space 2 to me, it was the first game that I played that had such a feeling of you really needed to carefully and strategically decide which weapons you were going to use for which enemies. It was a game that more than any game I had played, except maybe the original Doom, there was a feeling of it's that enemy, you need to use this weapon. And the cues with the enemies, again, similar to Doom, all had incredibly distinctive silhouettes and movement patterns and sound design that you just knew. And it was just incredible. It was such a quantum leap for that series. Like, I love Dead Space 1. I love it. But Dead Space 2, it created such iconic moments, you know, I always think back to that moment where you're fighting the stalkers in the cargo area and you just hear them like, they sound like velociraptors, right? And it's just these undead velociraptors, and they're just poking their heads out in between this like foggy, dark cargo area. And I just remember going like pausing the game and just going, like, okay, I can do this. Like, I can do this. And to me, it's an empowering, I think they really nailed that feeling that I think, as much as I love Resident Evil 5, I'm not going to say it. I got another hot take about that. I'm not going to say it yet. But as much as I love stuff like Resident Evil 5, where they really try to amp up the feeling of tension and like action at the same time as sort of horror and terror, I found Dead Space 2 like just nailed it. They nailed that feeling of like, I'm terrified, but I'm gonna go in there and I'm gonna deal with whatever's in there. And
it's funny, like I hear, as a general rule, I hear more about Resident Evil 5 than Dead Space or Dead Space 2.
It's true.
For that matter. Like it seems like I don't want to say it flew under the radar. It's a pretty successful franchise, but at the same time, like it just doesn't feel like anybody talks about them anymore.
Like it's definitely a series that I think like if it got another shot, like, and, you know, not a reboot, like just like another shot, like really keep going with it, I think it could do something great. The Wii game, I don't know if you ever played it.
No, actually.
Extraction. Which is, I mean, I'm going to say this wrong. I mean, it's an on-rail shooter. Is that the right way to say it? But like,
I think so.
It's an on-rail shooter. Extraction's great, is fantastic. Like it's a really awesome game, and it kind of proves that the universe has legs.
And I'm assuming that, like, because it's a Wii rail shooter, you're using the Wiimote to aim and stuff. I have all day for that.
Yep.
Because, like, that's what they do with Sin and Punishment. And it's like, holy shit, man, the rail shooter is actually good because of the Wiimote.
Yep.
Otherwise, I have no patience for it. Like, the rail shooters with a controller, even if it's an analog controller, I'm like,
no. Like,
I hate to say it because a lot of people love it, but I don't know, man. I played the Wild Guns remake on the PS4. A remake is a strong word. The Wild Guns port on the PS4, and I played it with a couple buddies. And half an hour in, 40 minutes in, we were like, all right, I think we're good.
Yeah.
You know, and then we moved on to Windjammers, and then we never saw Wild Guns again.
Yes, no, absolutely. It's on, actually, Extraction's also on, I just remembered, it's on PlayStation Move.
Oh, really?
You can play with PlayStation Move. Yeah.
Well, I mean, for the 5 people who have the PlayStation Move and the system that works for it, this is great news.
Don't they use the same controllers for PSVR though?
They do, and you know what, Arnie? Like, I haven't had an opportunity to go back and test them out with the older hardware and see if it's like, you know, if it works, if it's backwards compatible. Had I known that we were going to get into Dead Space Extraction on the Phantasy Star episode, I might have prepped beforehand and answered this question that everybody's dying for the answer to.
So
yes.
I feel like it was very clear that this was going to be a topic of discussion.
No doubt about it.
Yeah,
but Mike, you only have 4 more games to choose from.
I know. Paul is like looking at me. He's just like putting his finger across his throat. He's like, "Wrap it up, son."
Well, what we'll do is we'll go with one more game.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I think one more game. If I had to choose one more, I guess it's Prince of Persia. Like,
nice. No kidding.
Sands of Time. I mean, if I had to pick one, I think Sands of Time, I played it. It was such a revelation. Like, it was the game that I never knew that I wanted, that I loved so much. Like, the feeling of movement and acrobatics. I realized I was like, this is it. Like, and I think, you know, like, if I had to choose, you know, like one feeling, like that rush feeling you get, like when you're a kid and you love a game so much, like, it's always going to be that. There's something about being that ninja, you know?
Yeah. I was gonna say, there, like, especially in the PS2 era, I remember fewer things making me feel cooler than wall running in Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. Like, I love doing that. I love the movement and the combat and all that stuff. Like, is so awesome.
Yep.
Man, I really feel like I missed out. There's,
it's good.
There are a lot of games from that era. Like, I just never got around to, because I was. I don't want to say wasting time, but I was wasting a lot of time playing stuff like Pro Evolution Soccer. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
and it's not that it's a bad game. It's a great game, but I was just stuck in the whole, like, you know, create a team and join the league. And it's like, and then you play a game and you get extra money and then you buy a new player and you have to use that player. And then it's 5 a.m. Right? Like,
exactly. That's the trap of those sports games, is they catch you forever. They can be worse than RPGs in that way.
They can. Yeah. It's shockingly so. So Mike, where would you rank Phantasy Star among your all-time favorites?
I would rank it. It's definitely in the top 10. I'd probably say it's like number 8. It's not even, I mean, for me, Master System is always going to be Zillion. Like, if I have to choose one, it's going to be Zillion. Just because of how, I don't know, like, just how it makes me feel and like all the memories I have sort of associated with it. And, you know, I recently watched the anime and that was really weird and surreal.
Anime?
Yeah, it's based on an anime. It's crazy. It's crazy. It's actually like a really weird story, but like just that the iconic opening shot, you know, Sega goes and it's JJ and he's pointing the light phaser at the screen and fires. Like, I've never seen anything that cool. Like, I've never seen an intro that cool. You know,
and you know, like Zillion. So to me, Phantasy Star is one of these games where if you encounter someone else, either in person or online, who has played it and played it like back in the day, like instantly, like you have this bond with this person, right?
Yeah.
And that's always kind of been my experience with Phantasy Star. And I remember you mentioned Zillion. I was hanging out with you a couple of years ago, Mike, and you mentioned Zillion and how great Zillion is. I never played Zillion as a kid, but let me tell you, man, people online who played Zillion as kids fucking love Zillion.
Love it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, they are hardcore about it. And similarly with Phantasy Star, which I guess we should get to, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, right before we do, I was going to tell you, like, we've known each other for years now.
Yeah.
But it was only like a few years ago, and it's again timely because of Phantasy Star. You posted, I think it was like a Facebook post that was from your Instagram, like it was, and it was you with a copy of Phantasy Star with this, you know, beautiful, wide-eyed, starry-eyed look on your face and this big smile. And I don't know if you remember this, but I remember literally writing you going, you play Phantasy Star?
I remember this very conversation.
Hey, you play Phantasy Star? And you were like, you've played Phantasy Star? And I was like, yeah, man, like I had a Master System, like, how have we never talked about this? And it was, you know, we had been friends for years and we had never talked about it. And all of a sudden, like, I mean, I credit Paul with my complete resurgence back to retro gaming and, you know, building my collection and playing stuff and just, and it was all from that funny moment and kind of remembering how awesome that game was and seeing someone else's pure joy and discussing it. And I was like, yeah, man, it is sweet, you know? Anyway, but yeah.
So Phantasy Star, I guess we should tell everybody what it is for those who don't know. Phantasy Star is the Sega Master System's first role-playing game. It was developed and released, December 1987 in Japan, 1988 in North America and for the PAL region. PAL region didn't get screwed quite as hard with Sega games as they did with Nintendo games.
Yeah. Well, the Master System was hugely more popular in PAL territories than it was in North America, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I wonder what the chicken and what the egg is there. Like, was PAL less popular for NES because they were so shitty at releasing the games on time? Or did they just not care about releasing the game on time? Because who knows? If only Masa was here, he could tell us what it was like in Soviet Finland with the with the NES. But as far as the structure of Phantasy Star, standard kind of top-down view overworld map. That was pretty much the standard at the time. That was the way it was for Dragon Quest, you know, / Dragon Warrior.
And going back earlier, stuff like Highlight on
exactly. Yeah. Even like Ultima, you know, you had your top down. The only game that preceded this that I can think of that didn't have like a top down map, it was an RPG, was Wizardry, which was always kind of 3D dungeony.
Gold box stuff like Eye of the Beholder and things like that.
And speaking of wizardry, that's actually one of the games where Phantasy Star where it got one of its cues from. It was the first RPG, at least on consoles, that had 3D dungeons that scrolled very smoothly. Which, let me tell you, man, as a kid, those 3D dungeons, like, I remember kids coming over to my house, like little friends, and, you know, they see the title screen and you see the huge sprite drawing, whatever, of Alice and the words Phantasy Star. And I remember, like, you know, my friends who had visited me, like, they're like, wow, what a title screen, right?
Yeah. The music is just super sprawling, epic, getting you excited.
And then you get into the dungeon.
Yeah.
And, like, jaws just drop.
Yeah.
Because, like, there was no kind of graphical effect like that at the time. So you had your overworld map, but then you explored dungeons and it was in a 3D scrolling view. I have in my notes here, the first role-playing game ever translated into Portuguese.
Yay!
So shout out to Sega for actually servicing the pork chops for once.
Nice.
The Nintendo completely ignoring us. No wonder I didn't like Nintendo.
It's true.
Yeah. I mean, and here's the thing, going back to the 3D dungeons for a second, like, I'm gonna, like, full disclosure, my first time playing Phantasy Star was maybe, like, 2 years ago. Yeah. And I recently went back to it, for research for this episode. And, you know, obviously, like, my eyes are, you know, sort of looking at this through the lens of having already played, like, RPGs years later, of Phantasy Star's release, but when you think of it in the context of an RPG released in 1987 on an 8-bit home console, the fact that, you know, you could get, like, dungeons like this, and the fact that they weren't, like, you know, the first ones are sort of simple, but you can easily get lost in them. Like, the fact that there is some complexity, like, it's not just a straight line to the end of the dungeon or something like that. Because when you look at a lot of, like, games like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, like, on Nintendo, the dungeons are flat lays, but there's, like, a lot of them aren't very complex. A lot of them are like, here's a square, here's the stairs are over here, there's, like, maybe 2 or 3 different rooms, and, you know, you just follow the path and keep on going. But with Phantasy Star, it's like, you have to draw out these maps, especially as you get later into the game, because you will get lost and die.
Oh, man. And some of them are like, and as you get later into the game, I think you can get by without drawing maps for, like, the first planet.
Yeah.
And maybe the first dungeon before you get Noah.
Yeah.
It starts getting a little bit more complex then, but then after you get Noah, the fourth party member, the dungeons just become, like, you have to, like, I say you have to draw them. As a kid, I never did.
Right.
I just kind of played the game for so many thousands of hours that I eventually just kind of memorized what was going on.
Same. Yeah.
Yeah,
Same
but I mean,
thing.
that's how much I played this game, right?
Yeah. I mean, and you had infinite time, so.
Exactly, right? I was, 11 years old. Time was the resource that I had the most. But yeah, like, it really is kind of incredible that they were able to accomplish this with, such limited technology, right?
Yeah, I mean, if I can jump in, like, some of the later dungeons, like, we'll talk about this more later, but Bay and Malay in particular, when you look at the layout now and you see how it's not only about multiple floors and pathways on floors that are completely independent from each other. So it's like, I need to go up 7 floors this way, then 7 floors down, and then 7 floors up the other way. And you're also, you have to fall into like traps and pits. There are traps and pits where it's like, no, this is necessary. Like, you need to actually, like, that level of it and is crazy. And I really like how you brought up, Arnie, about sort of the old 2D layouts, because what they had to play with there was about obfuscation mostly. It was about limiting what you could see. So when you first play something like Sword of a Million, or you're playing Dragon Warrior, I think in Dragon Warrior was like this. Like, if you have a torch, you can only see a limited space in the dungeon. And even when you could, it was about, okay, we're going to take you on this long path that may or may not be a dead end. And that was kind of the thing. But when you're playing Phantasy Star, it's like, dude, I don't know. Like, you're looking around, it's just walls. And you're like, so where do I go?
Yeah, no, it's really, really cool in that way. And it does that thing that Zelda did at first, where it shows you something on the map that looks really interesting, but you can't immediately get to. Yeah. And so you're like thinking about it. Like you said, Bayamale, we also pronounce that differently.
Oh my God.
But you mentioned that, but that's like kind of the final-ish dungeon of the game. And you can see it right at the beginning of the game. It's surrounded by mountains. And as a kid, I remember looking at that being like, what the hell is that? Mm-hmm. And just kind of like obsessing over the whole game. Like, how do I get to it? How do I get to it? How do I get to it? And obviously, eventually you do and you figure it out, but it's really cool. Like it did that thing that Zelda kind of pioneered, the, hey, what's that? I can't get to it. And then you think about it. Yep. Anyway, last little fact here, only the second console game that was released on a 4 megabit cartridge. Afterburner was the other one. And, it's funny, like, I just reading about it, like, Yuji Naka had to go to Sega and be like, no, you don't understand. We need 4 megs for this game.
Yeah.
I need you guys to manufacture this cartridge.
Yeah.
And
yes,
Sega
it will
was
retail
like,
for $150, but I need these 4 megabytes.
Yeah.
And Sega was like, yeah, okay, man, we trust you, which was kind of their MO at the time with their kind of champion developers, the Yu Suzuki's, the Yuji Nakas, and so on, right? So yeah, they gave him the 4 megabit cart. And, personally, I remember seeing that because I remember as a kid being like, okay, I have Alex Kidd and Miracle World in my hand and it says the mega cartridge, which means it's a 1 meg cartridge. And as a kid, I understood that. So when I saw games like Space Harrier and Rocky and they were 2 meg cartridges, like I remember thinking, oh my God, those must be twice as good, which was true of Space Harrier, but not so much for Rocky. And, Mike, do you remember the 4 meg cart being a selling feature?
Absolutely. I remember, we can look at the box. Like, I know there's a little corner, corner seal in the box, like 4 megs of power, and that whole thing. And I remember it being more expensive and I'm jumping ahead a little bit to Phantasy Star 4. I remember Phantasy Star 4 was similar in that at the time I think it was $100. And people were like, what? And, easily worth that, by the way. But yeah, no, absolutely. And it's kind of interesting because I think, one of the things that I find, like, obviously where that went, is in terms of the sprites, the memory, like remembering all the sprites and the incredible animation work that's happening, just the size and the scope and the scale of the dungeons. But, another kind of funny thing that I wanted to sort of kind of like ask you guys about was that, because I was thinking about it, you can save anywhere in that game.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you're out of combat, you can save.
Yeah.
Like it does not matter. And there's 5 save slots, or is there 4?
5.
Okay.
5.
And basically at the time, I don't think saving like battery backup was that. I wanted to try to remember. I was like, how many games before that had that?
It was mostly passwords.
Yeah.
At that time. Yeah.
I don't remember feeling, but what was funny is that I don't remember the battery backup itself. Like, oh, I can save my game and play again. I don't remember that blowing my mind. But I remember, because I think Zelda had it where you had to hit reset as you were powering off the game, and I think some other games had it, but I remember the fact that we could save anywhere. I was like, that's crazy.
It's
like,
fantastic.
I don't have to talk to someone. Like,
yeah.
I just do it.
Yeah.
In
fact, to this day, I'm angry when games give me save points instead of just allowing me to save anywhere.
Yeah.
And look, I understand why, and we'll actually get to the why later, funnily enough.
Right.
But and I know why, but like Persona 5, for example, I love Persona 5, but goddamn, dude, there was one stretch where I was playing it before going to work and I couldn't save for like an hour and a half. And I'm like, I'm going to be late for work, man. Like, this is killing me. Guys, I need to save. Like, I can't just, and I know I can just put the PS4 on rest mode and so on. Like, I know that there are answers.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm an old man who's used to saving a game.
Yeah.
Thus, right?
Well,
Anyway.
and even if you put it on rest mode, what if the power goes out? What if, Somebody trips on the power cord or something.
Thank you. Good point. Yeah. What if somebody trips on that power cord?
I know.
Just picturing Paul's at work, and it's like, oh, there's power failure. And just all of a sudden it dawns on Paul, and he's like,
just like intensely sweating.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so yeah, there's our little intro to Phantasy Star. Arnie, I think we're going to take a break now, if that's good with you.
Sounds good.
And when we come back, we'll just talk about some of our experiences with the game before getting into the production and history behind it. So we'll be back in a moment. And we're back. And before we actually get to, the history of the production of the game, which also has a lot of interesting little fun facts, we're just going to talk about our experiences with the game. I know for me, this was a seminal game that really shaped, my own experiences and sensibilities as a gamer. But Mike, what about you? Like, what was your experience like with Phantasy Star when you first?
Phantasy Star, I mean, we got it one Christmas, and I mean, I don't really know any other way to say it. Like, it just completely kind of blew our minds. Like, all four of us, we had never played anything. And some of us had played like old PC role-playing games and stuff like that, like, on people's Commodore 64s and things like that. But playing this on a Master System, with that level of kind of brightness and polish, like that level of color, and because it really felt like this anime kind of cartoon come to life. Yeah. With that epic quest sort of behind it. We had never played anything like it, and it completely blew our minds. And we all became totally obsessed with it. And it was also the first time we really tried to play a role-playing game like this. So the first thing we did was we were like, oh, okay, all right, we talked to everybody in town. I guess we should go out. And then we went out and we fought a swarm and we died. Immediately. We were like, oh man, okay, all right, let's try it again. And hopefully this time we'll get further. And we just, kept walking and went a little further and then died again. And we were like, wait, what are we doing wrong? And we were like, you gotta fight a bunch of times and then you get stronger. That's how unaware we were. That's how much it was this learning experience. And we were like, oh my God. And you can talk to people and they tell you clues, what? And just it completely, blew our minds. We had just never played anything that had any sort of sense of that scale at all. And, and it's funny because, all the things that I remember about it, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but there's so many kind of seminal moments that I remember about it. But one of the, at large in general, the holistic thing I'll say right now is that the four of us as brothers, we worked together. It was this great feeling of we are playing this together. We have this game together. And
that's so cool.
Sort of move forward with it. And it's almost like we all had to buy in. If we made a choice, it was okay, are we going to go to the dungeon yet? No, we're not. Okay, we're going to keep leveling. Right. Okay, cool.
See, that's something that I wanted to ask you about, Mike, because I made the sound tactical decision to be an only child.
Right. Okay. Good for you. No, that's good.
And so RPGs were sort of the thing that I was really into because I was this is a thing I just play on my own. And there's a very involved story and I get to meet all these characters and it's really cool. But as somebody who grew up with siblings, how was it? Especially I'm thinking because you grew up in a time where more than 2 controller ports on a system without any sort of external device was not a normal thing. Yep. So what was it like playing a game like this that's just one player? Did you guys take turns controlling it? Did you control by committee?
It's a really good question. It kind of ties into some stuff some of my most cherished memories about it. But I mean, put it this way. So I had 2 older brothers.
Yeah.
And, they're the smarter ones and the bigger ones, right? So there was a lot of, okay, if Mike or Kev are playing, they're grinding. Like they're just, they're going to play, they're going to like fight. Okay. We've determined these areas where we can go, and we're going to fight werbats there because they give you good gold drops, so you can save up to get the laser shield, and like I'm jumping ahead. Or Kevin loved fishmen. So he would just walk to beaches and fight fishmen because we thought the animation was cool.
Yeah.
And my older brothers were the ones who were like, no, we're going to go in the dungeon. Like, no, we're going to drive, bro. Like, we're going to, and so it was okay. Like, we were cool with that because if something went wrong, and we were the ones at the controls, my older brothers would be like, you mother, and I'd just be like, what, man? I was doing the best I could, So it ended up like that. I mean, we didn't, eventually when we got older, we had our own saves. Like we all just had our own saves, and we would serve ourselves, and that was cool. I mean, I won't get into the kind of fights and the cuts and bruises about playing competitive games or sort of cooperative games. But when it came to RPGs, we mostly had our own games, and we try to play them, we try to just kind of take turns. Sort of thing. There wasn't too much infighting, but yeah, like that first time playing Phantasy Star, my biggest sort of video game memory period. I think if you ask me what's one, and that's in the game, there's a part in the game where you can go to another planet. Which again, mind blown. Like insane. Like the fact that we were like, there's another planet? Are you kidding me? Yeah. Like what? And so sorry to interrupt, but there's a spaceport there right at the beginning of the game. It's like, and even with the knowledge that there is a spaceport there, it's still mind-blowing that you go to another planet, right? You're like, it's coming. But then you get in the ship and the music hits and it's like super poppy, and you're like, oh my God, we're traveling through space, and then you land on a planet. There's different music. Yes.
And I'm totally interrupting you, Mike. Please continue.
No. It's so true. Like you're taking the words out of my mouth, because when you land on another planet and the music's different, and all of a sudden you feel like, what? Is there twice as much a game? Like, I don't understand. like your brain explodes. And so, but the moment I'm talking about was, again, we're playing this as a group. And we figured out, okay, we got the passport, which I love. I love how you get the passport. It's so cool. We'll talk about that later, but I love it. And you get the passport, and we get the road pass, and we're like, okay, let's go. And so we go, and we had it all ready, but then we had to go to school. And so we had to go to school, and my brother had swimming after, and we had to wait for him. He was older than us, so he trained longer. So we got home first. And my little brother and I were sitting there, and we're like, we want to play so bad. We want to go to the other planet so bad. And we just really wanted to go. And my oldest brother the night before was like, don't do it. Like, we're doing it together. And we're like, okay. And we did. We caved. We did. We played the game, and we went over. And what we did was we wrote a note. We wrote a note to him, and we left it on his desk, and we said, we're really, really sorry. We couldn't help ourselves. We feel really bad, but we played the game and we went to the other planet. And like, I don't even know if he had a reaction, but it was just the fact that I'll always remember that. Like the fact that we had that much of a reaction to it. Yeah. And sent this really touching, like genuinely sorry. Like we felt really bad, but we were and it's something I come back to all the time. Like when I kind of remind myself, like, why am I doing this? Yeah. Why am I playing these games, and why do I do what I do? And like, I kind of remember stuff like that. I go, oh,
yeah. That's amazing.
And Arnie, so you started playing it much more recently, like you said 2 years ago, yeah?
I did, yeah.
Thoughts?
And so here's my thing. I was very nervous about this episode. I was extremely nervous about this episode because Paul has said on more than one occasion, I think on this show, actually, that this is his favorite game of all time.
Right.
And
I say it like every other episode.
Yeah, pretty
like
much.
if I don't get a Phantasy Star mentioned in an episode, it's like a failing on my part.
Right.
Yeah. And so we'd previously done episodes on games that like are personal favorites of mine, and those have all gone really well with everybody. And I credit that to me just having impeccable taste in games.
Yes, of course, without reproach.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But so I was really nervous because I was like, man, what if I don't like it? Like, what if I just, because I'm coming into it with the knowledge of like, you know, I'm going backwards essentially. And I'm like, I don't want to like start playing this and be like, man, I'm not enjoying this. And so I was really nervous. But when I started playing it, I will say, like, obviously there are things to Phantasy Star that, like, are, in hindsight, annoying, but only with the knowledge of...
I can't believe this is happening right now.
But that's obviously with the knowledge going forward of, you know, games that came after it. But I was genuinely surprised at how many things, like, in this... you know, amazingly large 4 megabit game. Mm-hmm. I was like surprised by even now with my like jadedness. Like, female protagonists right off the bat. Like, I was like, this is really cool. And, you know, just booting it up and like seeing the splash screen with her on it, I was like, wow, like the art style is still really eye catching. Like all these years later, like, you know, pixel art is sort of timeless. But really good pixel art, I think, even goes beyond that to where it's like, it looks good even compared to like what we have now, in the sense that like, obviously it's not hyper realistic, but as in terms of the aesthetic, I think like really like jumps off the screen sort of. But the fact that it's an RPG set in the future and in space, like obviously now I think that's sort of its own subgenre, and we see a lot of games going that way. But back in 1987, like it was medieval times or die, you know what I mean? Like,
it's a super good point. It's a super good point.
So I feel like the fact that it's not high fantasy, the fact that it's, you know, it doesn't have to do with like necessarily like a chosen one that rises, you know, to take on this like world destroying evil. You know, I feel like that was sort of a risk on Sega's part, that they were willing to do something like that, and it works. Like it's you know, aside from the fact that obviously what you're getting is like stills of people just talking at each other, like the story is engaging. Like I was like, oh, I want to like defeat, you know, what's his name? I'm like afraid of pronouncing this wrong. I'm like Lassic. And so that was really cool. Obviously, we talked about the dungeon aspect of it being like if I had played this when I was young, like I would have probably shit my pants. Like this is amazing. Like the fact that it's not only the fact that it exists, but that it's smooth and that it's detailed and it works as well as it does. Because there are examples of like Nintendo games where mazes like this are the worst part of the game. I'm thinking Fester's Quest.
Dude, Fester's Quest is #1 offender.
These like disgustingly gray, like boring mazes that you have to go through. Golgo 13, I think, also has like winding mazes that make no sense.
I'm so stoked you brought that up. I'm so stoked you brought that up, Arnie.
And you know, I think as of right now, like as far as I've gotten, the thing that annoys me the most, like the thing that I would take away from it, is just like the way that combat works is like, I like it and I hate it at the same time. Mm-hmm. Like if I have 4 owlbears and I'm just like, all right, let's attack. And then it's like, let's bring this one owlbear to like 2 damage and then let's go attack this other one. So that all 3 of them can still hit me.
Yep.
I'm like, but I mean, aside from that, like the way that combat is composed, that it's like, you know, head on and it's just the enemy. Like some of that shit is genuinely terrifying in a way. Like when I was in the first dungeon, I remember, or not the first one, the second dungeon, I remember turning, because the way combat sort of starts is just whenever you move or you turn, like enemies just pop up in front of you. Yep. But I specifically remember being in this dungeon and like turning to face a hallway and a werebat just appeared, and I was like, oh fuck, like I guess this is where I die. because like it's so like there's genuine fear sometimes in the way that like these things are presented. And I think one thing that I didn't notice at first, and when I did notice it, I was like, this is really fucking cool, is the fact that you're sort of on this world map and there are different tiles. And depending on the tile that you're standing on, when an enemy appears, the background is different.
Yep.
And I thought that was really, really cool. Like, being on grassland is not the same as like being on top of trees, which is like forest, and it's not the same as being on the shore. And obviously enemies are different depending on what kind of tile you are, and that complexity, like that sort of, I think it adds a certain element of strategy to where you want to be like, where can I go to find the particular enemies that like either drop more money or drop more experience or drop like a good combination of both. Like, if I'm 100%. Grinding to level, I want to fight these enemies. But if I'm grinding to buy better gear, I want to fight these other enemies.
Yep. No, I mean, the backgrounds, I love that you brought up the backgrounds, because even now they look awesome.
Yeah.
Like the grassland background with the mountain range in the back, it's just, I look at it now and I'm like, that looks great.
Yep.
It looks fantastic.
Yeah.
And when you fight the fishman, like, like there's the beach and the fishman's like in the water.
Yeah. Yes, he's like coming out of the water.
Yeah. Which, I mean, you know, one wonders why not just back off and stay out of range of the fishman. But
kill fishman.
Well, and here's the thing too is, overall, like if I was going to give, you know, my assessment of it is I think it's definitely still a game that's worth playing now. Like, even if you're a modern gamer with modern sensibilities, like I think Phantasy Star does enough right and does enough things that not only did you not see when it came out, like I still don't think a lot of RPGs put as much effort into some of these little things as Phantasy Star does right now.
Yep.
Like there's so much in this game. Like there's so many little things that you might not pick up on immediately, but as you start playing it, you're like, oh, you know, all these things sort of work together to make, you know, a good game. Yeah. I think the other problem is I'm also like, I've been babied too much by current RPGs, so having to paranoically save is something that I haven't done in a long time. So there was a lot of like dying and losing like 30 minutes of progress and being like, oh, fuck. You know? But the last thing I want to talk about was that space, like the traveling to the other planet scene that you guys talked about. And I was hoping I was going to be the one to bring this up, because when I saw that, you know, I was blown away, like legitimately, because in my mind, I was like, oh, I'm going to travel to this other planet. And I feel like in an NES game, it would have been like cut to black, still of like a ship in space with text underneath that says, and so they travel to Modivar or wherever they're going, cut to black, like you're on the planet. Whereas Phantasy Star is like, you see your ship taking off from this planet and like, you know, sort of like, I want to say, it reminded me kind of like Mode 7-ish sort of thing, like traveling over the bitmap of this planet.
Yeah.
And then like cut to black, you're in space, traveling through a very like pretty space background.
Yeah.
Like it like randomly attractive. I was like, oh, this is like really appealing. And then like cut to black on the planet, like, you know, landing. And that's something that I feel like probably took up a good amount of memory space on this cartridge that they didn't need to do, but they were like, this is really cool, we're gonna do this.
And that's really like a large part of the charm of the game. There is so much stuff like that where you're like, this just looks cool, it feels cool, and it's a nice reward for the grinding, right?
Yeah.
Like, I know for me as a kid, the grinding wasn't a big deal because I'd never played an RPG before, so the grinding was actually fun. I could do it for hours and not really care.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's like, I gotta grind. But even with that point made, like, the game is interspersed with all these little rewards, and it's stuff that the developers put a lot of thought into, and they're like, oh, this will be fun, and we'll put it in. Like, a great example that I thought of, and then I read an interview and it kind of reinforced the opinion, the ice digger. Yeah. Right? So later in the game, Arnie, you get, you go to the ice planet Dazorus. Did I pronounce that right, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay. And you go to the ice planet Dazorus, and there are certain mountain passes that are impassable, right? And so you progress through the game and you talk to people and you get stuff and blah, you finish dungeons. And then eventually you get access to an ice digger. And what the ice digger does is it allows you to drill through the weak parts of the mountains in order to access new areas. Any other game, and the developers were like, any other game, you get an airship and you fly over the mountains. But wouldn't it be cool if you could just destroy the mountains and go through it? And that's what happens. It's the only game I've ever seen where you get an ice digger and plow through mountains, right?
Yeah.
Now, ecologically, a fucking disaster.
Yeah.
Like, not the message we want to send our children.
Destroying the
colonialization at its
biodome.
worst, man. Like, Motavians are just coming to Dazorus and they're just like wrecking the landscape.
Yeah, I know. It's awful.
Yeah.
But like as a kid, when you see the ice digger, you see the sprite, it makes the sound, drilling through the mountains and stuff. It's the coolest thing.
Yeah. I remember also reading somewhere that one of the artists that sort of worked on this game was heavily inspired by Star Wars, I think, was one of the inspirations. And I can definitely see that. And it works to its advantage. Like the space motif is very intriguing. And I think especially back in, like, you think back to the 80s, like, space must have been, like, of the 2 or 3 most popular themes of anything. Like, It was space, dinosaurs, and, like, robots or something like that. Or, ninjas.
No, I think robots over ninjas. We had Transformers.
Yeah.
We were
and Phantasy Star has 2 of those 3. It has space, and it definitely has robots. And the other thing is, I will say, I really do. I enjoy my time with this game, but it definitely has like early RPG plot points. Like my favorite is the one I'm doing right now, which is I'm trying to get Noah, and the way you do that is you have to talk to the governor of is it Matavia?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the only way to talk to him is to get him some sweets. And so in my mind, I was like, cool. Like, I know there are food shops. Like, I'm sure one of these cities just has, like, a secondhand shop that has sweets. And so, like, I go to everyone and I'm like, well, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, I really want to try to get Noah before this recording. So I looked up a playthrough, and what I read was like the most insane. Like, I thought like the person who wrote this walkthrough had like a stroke. You have to go to a dungeon. Mm-hmm. You have to go 4 floors down, and this is the first dungeon to have levels. Like, up to this point, you've only had single floor dungeons, and then immediately 4 floors, and then to find a cake shop that is at the bottom of this dungeon.
Like
to then buy sweet cake for $1,000.
Yeah.
$1,000. Like, the most expensive thing I had bought up to this point was like maybe $300.
Yeah.
Do you know how much overhead there is in running a cake shop in a dungeon? Like,
I mean, they knew too, because I remember when you get there, the guy's like, yeah, sorry, you got a weird spot for a shop over here. And you're just like, yo, what? Like, Arnie, I love that you brought up the price though, because you're right. Like, there was nothing worse than getting all the way down and you're like, I don't have enough. I don't have enough
for a cake?
For a cake? And you got to go all the way back out. Like, oh man. Yeah.
The cake shop is a funny one because like, that was one of the number one questions that the developers got asked about, which was like, A, why is there a cake shop in the dungeon? And B, who came up with this crazy, like, this doesn't make any sense. But that's part of the charm, right? Yeah. Like, there's a cake shop in the dungeon. Like, what other game do you have to speak to the governor, but you need a cake to do it, and you have to go into a dungeon to buy the cake, right? Like, Either you slap your head and you say, this is ridiculous, I'm not playing. And that's great. Like, totally be a boring person. You'll live a great life. Or you can just buy in and go to the dungeon and buy cake.
Yeah.
Well, and here's the thing. I think the thing that makes it better for me personally is the fact that, like, up to this point, you know, obviously it's a fantasy world, so it's not like, you know, we're going point A to B on everything here, but there's sort of a linearity where I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Oh, you know, that makes sense. Going from here to here makes sense.
Yeah.
But like being like, oh, you need to get a cake that's in the last level of this 4-story dungeon that's crawling with like significantly powerful enemies at this point.
Yeah.
It's easily the hardest dungeon.
To then spend like $1,000 to buy a cake. I was just like, you know, I love this, but also like, this is such like an 8-bit RPG sort of quest.
Yeah, no, 100%, dude. It's funny, and just reading about it, because it's been a few years since I've played it. Like, man, just reading about it, even Mike, when you mentioned the word road pass, I was like, oh my god, you needed a road pass. I forgot about that.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much stuff that I forget. And I know, like, just to wrap it up with me and my experiences with it, like, I mean, I don't really have a heck of a lot to add that Mike hasn't said, which is that, like, I got the game, and it was, I think I mentioned this on the show before, the game was, like, the secret game. Like, I had got my Christmas presents for that day, and then my mom came to me before lunch and was like, oh, by the way, here's this. And I was like, oh, because it was Phantasy Star. And, and I played it, and this is why, like, the people who played it back then, they all have that kind of bond, is because we were all completely blown away. There was nothing else like it. It looked fantastic. It played fantastic. It was an entirely new experience. The scale is epic. You know, it's bright. It's colorful. To me, it's perfect. You know, it's my favorite game ever, right?
Before we move on, because I know we're running a little bit long, but this will only take a second. I do want to mention the process for getting the passport, because that was another thing that I absolutely love. It's essentially like Phantasy Star makes you do TSA pre-check before TSA pre-check was like a thing.
Yeah.
The way you get the passport is you make it to the spaceport, and then you talk to this person in a shop, and they ask you a series of, I think, 2 rigorous questions to find out that whether you're able to get a passport. And I think the questions are, have you done anything illegal? Yes, no. And what was the second question?
I can't remember.
Me neither.
Was it like, I want to say it's like, are you smuggling anything or something like that? It's like real, like, legit questions that somebody at like the airport would ask you. Yeah. And then you pay $100 and they're like, okay, cool, here's your passport.
So great.
And you know, and again, like, not to belabor the point, but it's part of the charm of the game, right?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
there are all these little touches, all these little details that they add that really adds a lot of flavor and depth to the world. Like, the fact that you can talk with monsters, you know, you couldn't do that in an RPG beforehand, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, look, for the most part, you're not talking to monsters, you're killing them, right? You want the XP, you want the gold, but the option is there, and it adds a little bit of depth to the game, right? The fact that you can talk to Dozorians when you fight them, the fact that Noah can cast magic and you can talk to dragons is like the coolest thing, right?
Yeah.
And again, ideally, you want to start killing those dragons because they give you so much stuff.
Yeah.
But it's cool that the option is there. And this game is just loaded with those kind of little features. We'll get to a little bit more in the way of memories on it later. But yeah, we'll take a quick break now, Arnie, and when we come back, we'll get into some of the production history of the game.
Sweet.
Alright everyone, and we are back. So let's get into the production of Phantasy Star. As usual, like with these, especially with the older games, because it was kind of like the Wild West back then, a lot of fun stuff to read about out there on the internet, interviews with the developers, and you hear it's just fun, man. It's fun reading about all these old games and how they were made, and like I said, you know, how it's kind of the Wild West. So at the time in Japan, RPGs were starting to get, become a little bit more popular. Japanese gamers were playing games from the West like Ultima. Wizardry was a big deal. And so then you had your Dragon Slayers and your Dragon Quests, the first few Japanese developed RPGs. Mm-hmm. And hey, Sega has a game system. And hey, we need an RPG. Everybody else is doing it. But of course, because Sega's market share was about 1/10 of the size of Nintendo's, they had to go to their first party in order to make this RPG to compete with the other systems. Yeah. So they tasked Kotaro Hayashida and Yuji Naka with Phantasy Star. Those were pretty much the two lead developers on the team. The team was about 10 people who worked on this game, which is... Mike's just shaking his head. It's so quaint.
It's insane is what it is. It's incredible.
So Kotaro Hayashida, credited in the game, and remember, this is an old Japanese game, so all of the credits were aliases. Nobody actually used their real name when you go to the ending credits scene.
Yep.
So Kotaro Hayashida, known in the game as Osali Kota, he was the lead planner. He was the lead behind Alex Kidd in Miracle World.
The good one.
Yes, I see in brackets, I put the good one.
I mean, I would be like, hey, Shinobi World's dope. I like
Shinobi World's good. I actually
what's the other one? High Tech Land or
High Tech? It's the most bizarre game you've ever played.
High Tech World is really weird.
Really weird game. Well, like I said this on a previous show, but like, we'll have to talk about it some other time. Like, you guys won't believe how weird this game is. Mm-hmm. I actually put the good one there in brackets because I thought Ozzy was going to be on the show. And the last episode we did, Ozzy really pooped on the Alex Kidd franchise.
He did.
Yeah. And I was like, no, man, Miracle World was really, really good.
I'd go to bat for that.
Yeah.
Listen,
and you can see the pedigree there.
Alex Kidd is no Keith Courage. But,
oh my God, Keith Courage.
That's a good one.
So yeah, also lead planner for Zillion.
Oh.
So I mean, the pedigree's there, right? Yes. Like, this guy knew what he was doing. Yeah. And he left Sega in 1996 for Game Arts, who was the developer behind Grandia. So funny little thing, I was reading an interview with him, and we were talking earlier about being able to save wherever you want. And this little thing I read made me think of a specific situation. So with Phantasy Star, with me as a kid, I had friends come over and they would play Phantasy Star. So we'd have like summer break and I'd have like friends come over and they would come over like every day and just play Phantasy Star and finish it like in a month. Yeah. Or I had a neighbor a few doors down and I'd bring the Master System over to his house. Strangely enough, he had an Amiga. Which was bizarre, but it allowed us to play games that we would never have played otherwise, like Shadow of the Beast, for example.
Amiga had some weird ones.
Yeah. But I would bring Phantasy Star over to his house. I'd leave it there. He could play it. I think I had an NES at the time, so it wasn't a big deal just leaving a system somewhere else. I had, something at home still to get my fix with. And so he eventually encountered a situation. He was late in the game too. Like, this was just before Biomale. I think he was getting the hovercraft. And he was in a dungeon and he's like, I don't know if I can get out, because he had no magic left and he had he didn't have the item that escapes you from the dungeon, and he saved his game and his team was almost dead.
Yeah.
Jeez. And he's like, I don't know if I can get out.
Was he just using the one save slot?
Yeah. Yeah. He was using the one save slot. And so I went over to his house and we kind of worked on it for like an hour, where we're just kind of rolling the dice and running from enemies hoping for the best. Mm-hmm. And it took us a little over an hour, but we barely made it out alive. Oh and it was like, oh my God, like that was tough. Like, this game can lock you.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And in one of the interviews with Hayashida, he's like, yeah, we put out the game and then we recognized after it was released that you could save your game and basically kill yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And ruin, 30 hours worth of work and then start crying.
Yeah. I mean, in fairness to them, I think that they mitigated it somewhat by having 5 save slots.
Yes. And And like, it never happened to me personally. Like, I don't know if as a kid I recognized the danger of the potential save state fail.
Yeah.
But I definitely always had enough magic to get out of a dungeon and so on, right? Like, I never left myself with no outs. But yeah, definitely a possibility at the time. And so later games, of course, would not put you in those kind of positions. So, and you know, it's just funny because he's like, you know what, back then we were all still learning. Everybody was still learning. Like, we just didn't know that these things could happen, which is bizarre when you think of a game like you paid $100 for or whatever. And it's like, what, these guys didn't even know, but you know, that's just how it was.
Yep.
Funnily enough, another thing, I don't even know why I put this in this section, but I think it's just because he mentioned it in one of the interviews that I read. So in the game, later in the game, you fight a lich, and, you know, taken from like Dungeons and Dragons lore and so on. And so because it's an English name, in Japan, they spell it with katakana. And if it's spelled with katakana, then it's pronounced rich, right? And so they're like, rich, haha, that's funny. And so in the game, it drops no money. So again, you know, small details. Yeah. You know, they're
no
thinking
mesetas for you.
No meseta for you. By the way, for my money, meseta, the best name for an in-game currency I've ever seen, except maybe for Zenny. I like Zenny in Capcom games.
Yeah,
here's my
that's a good point.
Here's my fun fact, I guess. In Spanish, the word for quarter is peseta.
Oh,
which is the same. It's spelled the same, but with a P instead of an M. And so I find no end to the joy of saying meseta over and over again.
That's so cool.
I wonder if that was on purpose. I have to think no.
I would have to assume not, but it's pretty funny for me. At least.
Oh, that's cool. So yeah, Kotaro Hayashida, lead planner. The lead programmer, Yuji Naka, in the name, or in the game rather, he's Mu Yuji. 4 U's after the M. I don't know what the deal is with that. But I mean, we all recognize who Yuji Naka is.
He's a legend.
Yeah, he's a legend. He started, I love hearing, so stuff like this. So he starts coding games at 17, doesn't go to university, applies at Namco. We might have mentioned this on the show before, now that I think about it. Maybe last year or something. But he applied at Namco, and Namco was like, no, you don't have a university degree. We can't hire you. And Yuji was like, okay. And then he applied at Sega, and Sega was like, welcome aboard, inexperienced youngster. And it's... the reason I like hearing about this stuff is because it's fun to think about like the alternate timeline where Yuji Naka does start working at Namco and what could have happened there, right?
Where they make the Pac-Man RPG.
Where they make I know, right? Pac-Man Star. Yeah. And furthermore, like, I don't know, man. I like seeing a little bit of failure from time to time. I'm like anybody else, right? Mm-hmm. You know, you like hearing the stories of like, wah, wah, you know, that person or company or whoever made a mistake. Yeah. And, you gotta wonder, Namco, like a few years later, like, oh man, who worked in HR during that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. But you gotta think, like, even if he had been hired at Namco, like, Sega was just, I feel like Sega was kind of crazy, like letting him do some of the things that he got to do. Like, I don't think he would have had the same freedom at Namco.
No, at the time, Sega was kind of the, I would say the leader. I can't think of a better word, but as far as kind of like free form creative work environment, kind of allowing the talent to do what they do with not very much supervision, which, hey, that can backfire. Right. Let's not kid ourselves. Like, Streets of Rage 3, Sega was like, okay, Yuzo, you do the soundtrack you want to do, and we don't care. And then you get the soundtrack for Streets of Rage 3 because there weren't any checks and balances there for Yuzo.
It's like cool industrial equipment. We like where you went with this, Yuzo. And he's like, I just want to explore like non-music music. All right, okay.
So yeah, you know, that kind of thing can backfire. But it definitely does result in some kind of unshackled creativity. So Yuji Naka, he was recognized at Sega for Space Harrier and Outrun, specifically. He did the console ports for both of those games. And both of those are excellent ports.
Great ports.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They're really good ports.
As a kid, I actually owned Space Harrier. I didn't own Outrun, but I did play it. And Space Harrier was just absolutely one of my favorite games. Yeah. And you can see, like, in Space Harrier, and again later in Phantasy Star, you can see, like, some of the technical tricks that they used in order to create kind of pseudo 3D environments and so on. Like in Space Harrier, for example, enemies come flying at you, but this is represented by sprites that get redrawn larger and larger.
Yep.
And it kind of creates this pseudo 3D feel. And it's stuff like that. That's all Yuji Naka. Yuji Naka back then was kind of like the pioneer.
Yeah, I recently got a chance to play. I think I told you about this, Paul, but I was at a local barcade, and they had the sit-down Outrun cabinet, the one with all the actuators that moves around. And Outrun is one of those games, like, I suck at Outrun. I'm terrible at it, but I could play it over and over again, just listening to Splash Wave. Yep. And watching my passenger get flown out of the flipping Ferrari every time.
So great.
But no, I think there's another. I think Afterburner is the other one that has like a sit-down cab that moves, and I can't imagine what that's like.
That cab is insane.
That cab is crazy. So crazy that I was not allowed to play it as a child.
That's fair.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I couldn't go in it. Also because like. Games were
probably cost like $5.
Yeah, Afterburner was like $1 at a minimum.
Yep.
And so I mean, like, you could play it, or you could go play Rampage 4 times.
Yeah.
Right. So you know, you kind of do the math as a kid. Yeah. Yuji Naka also responsible for coding the Sonic the Hedgehog tech demo, the legendary tech demo that created so much speed in that game. The last time he was involved in coding games was Nights into Dreams. Although he still has production credits for dozens of games.
Yep.
You know, even beyond Nights. And it's funny, Arnie, you mentioned the Outrun soundtrack.
Yep.
Yuji Naka also composed the Outrun soundtrack.
That's like, the best, like, 3-song soundtrack ever.
I'm saying, right? And, this guy who was a coder made the friggin' soundtrack. Like, what can you do, man? Talented fellow. His most notable contribution to Phantasy Star, that 3D dungeon wireframe program. And then subsequently being the guy who decided to slow it down. So the story is that originally the planners, the scenario planners, Hayashida and Kodama, the artist, they had this vision for a 3D dungeon. But they just couldn't quite get it to work the way they wanted. You know, it's choppy. It looks, you know, we're not here to make Fester's Quest, right?
Yeah.
So Yuji was like, okay, I think I know what you want. And then he wrote the program for the wireframe dungeon 3D, and they were like, this is amazing. And so they started testing it, but they all started getting motion sickness. So they're going through the dungeon, because you know when you turn, like it's a fully animated turn, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The problem was that it was too fast. So Yuji was like, okay, I think I can solve this. And he just slowed it down. So the reason that the dungeons are kind of a slowish crawl is just because the playtesters were getting motion sickness from walking around them, which is hilarious. Also hilarious because of the motion sickness I experienced today, even with games. Like, dude, Vice City put me out of commission for days.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and here's the thing is I think slowing it down is, and I don't know if you guys will agree, but for me at least, like when you're in that dungeon and especially when you turn, like when you walk forwards and backwards, it's not as noticeable, but when you turn, I feel like it's just slow enough for you to be like, please God, do not let like something be in front of me when I finish this turn.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Unintended consequences. No, it's a good point.
There's been so many times where I'll be watching a playthrough and, I love that you brought that up because there's so many times when I'm watching a playthrough where some guy gets a treasure chest and turns around and he's at a dead end and I'm like, rookie mistake, dude, don't do it.
I know. And he turns
and there's a guy right in front of him and I'm like, now you can't run. You can't run because you don't have room. And I love that. Like that was.
Oh, so are you supposed to like walk backwards from dead end?
Yes.
Oh.
Yep. And let me tell you, man, as kids, we all made that mistake.
Yeah.
Like I remember getting the treasure chest and then just turning around. And when you turn around, you have the wall behind you and you can't run. And I can't remember. I think I was fighting zombies and they were just barfing all over me.
Yep.
And I'm like trying so hard to run. And it's not working. And then I died and I'm like, oh, it's the wall behind me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really cool, like, thing that happened the first time I ran in a dungeon, because it doesn't happen in the overworld, but the first time I ran in a dungeon, especially when you're, like, at a corner, like, sometimes it'll turn you and then move you back.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like,
Yeah,
I
man.
had so many, like, little kid moments, like, playing this game. I'm going to keep playing it, like, after we record this, probably.
Yeah. And, yeah, no, that's exactly what I would expect you to do because it's a great game. So, after Yuji Naka, we've got, Rieko Kodama. In the credits, she's Phoenix Ri. She's the lead artist. She did design art for Alex Kidd in Miracle World, Quartet.
Yeah.
I know, right?
Quartet's awesome.
If I can get a Quartet reference into a show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very underrated game.
Yep.
Fantasy Zone 2, and I found out that she drew the boob dragon in Miracle Warriors.
Terrarin is the name.
It's the boob dragon. Let's not kid ourselves here. So, for those of you who don't know, Miracle Warriors was another RPG released on the Sega Master System. I think it came after Phantasy Star.
It did, yeah.
Yeah. 1 megabit cartridge, so definitely less sprawling in scope. Kind of a weird game. I replayed it. Very weird. I replayed it a few years ago. It's light. It's like 10, 11 hours. Not a big deal. And it was fun enough to revisit, just because of the strangeness of it.
Yes.
But as a kid, what I remember most from Miracle Warriors was, renting it 4 or 5 times, beating it, and then the final boss being Terrarin, this dragon woman with bare breasts.
Yeah.
And in the North American version, I kid you not, man. And as a kid, I was like, what is this? Right?
Movies.
Yeah. And in the American version, they basically, in order to censor it, so to speak, they just removed the nipples.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, like, they're boobs. Like, you can totally see this, right?
Yeah.
And so that was always my lasting memory from Miracle Warriors, was like being a 10 or 11-year-old kid and like, oh my God, that dragon has boobs.
Yep.
And don't you know that Rieko Kodama is the one who designed Terrarin the Boob Dragon?
No.
So
I couldn't
here's
believe
my
it.
question.
Respect.
Because I've never seen this. So is it like, in my mind, I'm sort of picturing like a centaur situation where it's like half woman on top and then half dragon on bottom?
With wings.
But is it just a dragon with boobs?
No. You are correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You're imagining, Arnie, you are an artist. Your imagining of it is pretty accurate.
I'm adjusting, I'm adjusting.
Because I was like, oh, okay, this kind of makes sense. Like, it's definitely weird. Like, I'd be like, okay, I guess that's a thing. But I was like, the way you were describing it for a second, I was like, is this just a regular dragon that they put boobs on for some reason?
Also would be hilarious.
No.
Yeah.
It's like, no. And I mean, I'm like adjusting my glasses. I'm like, well, actually, I mean, it's it's more like a manticore type deal. Like, she's got the female top.
Yeah.
Pun intended. And like, she has legs, but they're like,
They're dragon legs. Yeah.
Like with claws, and she's got wings and everything.
Yeah.
But it's like, she's hot.
Ultimate takeaway from this entire conversation.
I can't believe you brought it up, dude.
Well, I mean, of course, dude. It's like, I just, look, to me, that was a crazy thing to see as a kid.
It was.
Right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, we didn't have the internet, right? Like, I didn't see boobs every day. I didn't have access to that kind of stuff.
It was nuts.
So, like, to see that in a video game, no less, was just completely bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, especially as, like, the last boss. Like, it's the last thing you see before credits roll on this game.
Yeah. Which, by the way, must be how it got by censors, right? Because
absolutely.
nobody's going to play through the whole game just to see the boob dragon at the end.
It's really hard and weird to get there too.
Yeah,
I remember in the game.
Oh yeah,
it's
the game
really
it's full of like
cryptic.
weird translation errors and so on. It's very strange.
Yeah, I remember it being really weird because you know how like Sega Master Systems always had that thing in the corner that said like action or role playing. This one just said boob dragon, and people were really confused.
Yeah,
and then it became the best-selling Master System game of all time.
That's true. That's good.
So yeah, like you mentioned earlier, Arnie, her Phantasy Star designs influenced by Star Wars.
Yes.
And the team's overall desire to just make the game look different than any other RPG. Yeah.
Yep.
So like, it's not just science fiction. They also throw the fantasy stuff in there. They're like the armor looks kind of medieval, but they've also got laser swords and guns. And it just creates this very unique Phantasy Star look that frankly never, as far as I could tell, like, Mike, can you think of any other games that replicated that look and feel?
No. I mean, I think it's so distinct that I think if any game tried, it's the kind of thing where if any game tried to kind of meld those things, people go, oh, that's like Phantasy Star. Like, that's how distinct it was at the time that is the reference point. Like, anytime someone would try to do something like it, it's immediately kind of the reference point. And I think, one thing I wanted to point out to continue on that is that the civilian design, when you look at the civilians in the towns, when you look at Motavia, the cities and the villages, you look at the villages, that's much more traditional RPG.
Mm-hmm.
They're wearing kind of tunics and stuff like that, or whatever, just common like gowns. But when you go to the cities, it's way more futuristic. They're living in these weird bubble domes.
Yeah.
And it's got the, like, that to me is also just crazy. Like the fact that they showed that kind of, again, it's similar to what Paul was saying before. It adds that little touch of flavor that they're like, hey, look, there's literally different classes of people like on these planets. Like there's different living arrangements. Like there's a wide sort of spectrum of that. And I think like a lot of games didn't even have that. Like you play Final Fantasy or Dragon Warrior. And by the way, I'm not dissing them, but like you play those games and like, every village is the same. Like you go into one town, everybody looks the same. You can find the same sort of sprites. But here it was like you really weren't sure what you were getting into anytime you went into, a city and talked to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And Dezoris too. Like, you have like different like animal races, but they're people. Mm-hmm. Like the Dezorians are these weird gray-skinned kind of, strange people. So yeah, and that's kind of the feel that Kodama was going for, which is that, one of the design philosophies there was one of inclusion. So you have the party, for example, right? Rieko designs Alice. Alice, of course, is a woman. As far as I know, the first female protagonist, obvious, cause like then I think of Metroid. But like, Samus is a man until she's
until
not.
The end.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't really know that counts per se. That was more of a shock value kind of thing. But when you're a little kid at the store and you're purchasing Metroid, Samus is a guy. Anyway.
Oh no, that's a thing that I definitely agree with. Like, Phantasy Star doesn't sort of hide that fact. It kind of like revels in it. Like, it's once you turn the game on, splash screen, giant Alice, like right there looking badass. Yeah. It's like, this is it. Here we go.
It really absolutely is. I mean, now that I've like I can't believe I'm saying this. Now that I have a little more experience with anime and with watching some anime like with female protagonists and stuff that was, quote unquote targeted towards female viewers, especially back then, like even thinking of stuff like Sailor Moon, there's such a level in that intro of it. It reminds me of that. It reminds me of that idea of like, it's this very feminine kind of character, which, like it might be sort of playing up to certain tropes, but it's really clear that like, this is our protagonist. We're going on an adventure. She's going to take care of herself. Like, and there's like a real kind of power to all that. And I mean, and I know that like the design itself is, you know, much more practical, much more functional.
Oh,
yeah.
I mean, the color schemes, I guess you could argue. I mean, there's some pink, but, you know, it's a suit of armor. Like, she's ready to rock. You know? Like,
but
it's not...
Here's the thing, too, is I feel like, especially when we're talking, like, 80s and 90s, I feel like most media, I want to say, fell into one of two camps. It was either, like, this is specifically targeted at girls, which meant, like, pink everywhere, giant bows, like ridiculous, you know, super extra feminine.
Yeah.
Or it was like, we're trying to like get to boys, and then it's like skimpy outfits, large like proportions to everything, like also ridiculous. Whereas I think Phantasy Star like meets in a very practical medium where it's like, you can definitely tell it's a woman. There is femininity to her. Like, she's not, you know, sort of like a macho dude or anything, but she's also not like a teenage girl with like magical girl anime powers. Like, she's just like a very capable protagonist.
Yeah, pretty much, which it's incredible at the time that was even happening. Like, the fact that they have this, I mean, I don't want to say realistic because there's a talking cat, but like, you know, it's a very practical depiction of a female protagonist. And it's incredible to me that really just kind of fell by the wayside for the most part. Like, Alice was the first, and then after that, you didn't really have a heck of a lot.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think the next one I can really think of is Terra from Final Fantasy VI. Is that the name? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, you're getting that right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. That's the next big one I can think of as far as like female protagonists.
And that's like 5-6 years later.
Yep.
Yeah. There was definitely a dearth of that kind of thing happening. But, you know, Phantasy Star, props to them, the development team. I think 3 of the developers on the team were women.
Yep.
And you can see that influence of the game. Like, it really makes the game more colorful, more, I don't want to say soft, but it just kind of makes it a little more fun and less rough. You know what I mean? Not soft, but less rough.
To me, it makes it a more encompassing kind of world and experience. Like when I play it, there's such a lushness, there's such a richness to everything that's happening, whether it's the presentation, the music, you know, the gameplay itself. Like, it just feels like there's so much there and there's so much to do. So it only makes sense that there would be that extra thought, that extra layer of, hey, how can we make this actually more relatable and a little deeper than something, for lack of a better way to say this, I feel like it's not the best way to say it, but like, it just feels more mature. Like, it just feels more grown up, like, than much of the other stuff that was out there at the time. It feels like it respects, in some ways, in other ways, no, but I feel like it respects your time, it respects your intelligence, and it's like, hey, like, we're creating this quality product. Like, this isn't just some throwaway damsel in distress. Like, we really created this world, and we're really excited to share it with you, and we really want you to see it.
Yeah.
Well, here's the other thing.
Go ahead. I'm sorry,
Paul.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, to that point, the other thing that I forgot to mention before, and I don't think we've really talked about, is the fact that, you know, we've talked about how Phantasy Star sort of wanted to be different from your Dragon Quest, from your Final Fantasies. And I think one of the ways that it really does that in like a really weird way is like the very opening of the story, where it's like, when you think of a Dragon Quest or a Final Fantasy, it's more like, here's a group of adventurers that like are gonna battle this like sort of vague evil that's plotting to take over the world, and they're gonna look for these, you know, whether it be a sword or MacGuffin or whatever it is. But Phantasy Star is like, cold open, your brother is dead, like murdered by this, you know, guy that you now have to avenge him. So it's very like a personal story. It's not like, oh, I'm fighting this ultimate evil, you know, initially at least. That's gonna like destroy the universe or anything. It's like, no, this guy has killed my brother and I am going to avenge him. Like, there are real stakes in that. There's a real like connection to the character, in the sense that like, I can see why you're so invested in this journey.
Yeah. I mean, look, they figured it out a few years before Quentin Tarantino made it the theme for every single movie of his. You know, like,
Yep.
Everybody loves the revenge story.
Yep.
And like, I mean, it's an 8-bit video game, so there's a lot of blanks that you have to fill in yourself. But as a kid, as like a 10, 11-year-old, I was more than happy to fill in the blanks with my own imagination.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, you know, like I said, everybody loves the revenge story. And at the time, it was pretty unique. You know, it wasn't just like the big bad that you have to fight. It was very personal. And in spite of the fact, sorry, Arnie, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, to go off of what you were saying, like, it's so cool that I feel like in any other video game, the protagonist would have been Alice's brother.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And in
100%.
this video game, it's like, no, he's dead. Like,
yeah, and
he got straight up murdered like immediately.
And not only that,
and he fucked up. Like, he's kind of stupid.
Yeah,
you know, to be honest,
exactly.
like he just went after him with what, like a sword or something. He was just like, "Oh, I'm gonna take out Lastic." It's like, bro,
no, man, you have quests to do beforehand.
You gotta figure this out.
Yeah. And he had like blood coming out of his mouth and stuff.
Yeah,
like,
that's the thing. It was like, I was like, I can't imagine playing this as like an 8-year-old being like, whoa.
Oh, it was awesome.
But in spite of that grisly, relatively grisly opening, the game is the other defining factor there of the style is it's a very positive game.
Mm-hmm.
That was part of the development process was Kodama and Chieko Aoki, who was the story writer, the storyboard designer. They set out to make a world where all these different races and of course the two sexes, everybody's working together, towards this common goal. So you have a party where you have Alice, the woman, you have Odin, the guy, you have Meow, or as some people, I don't know who would do this, but some people say Mayo. Sorry, Mike. Yeah, I don't understand who would ever pronounce it that way.
I know, it's super weird.
Yeah. But you have Meow, who is like this talking cat. And then you have Noah, who in the original design document was meant to be androgynous. And then depending on the choices you make as you go through the game, that's what develops Noah's gender into either male or female.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and at the time, obviously completely unheard of, right?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
First of all, you don't have any games at the time that I'm aware of where your choices kind of affect how a character develops.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe like a Sierra game on PC, and even then, those are point and clicks.
Yeah.
Anyway, whatever. So not only that, but the fact that there's an openly androgynous character, in the late 80s, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that just didn't happen. But, I mean, that was kind of the goal of the ladies on Phantasy Star who created this story was, we want it to be positive, we want it to be inclusive, everybody working together towards this common goal of beating up this guy who killed Alice's brother.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know, I think that's pretty much the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, just to finish up here, Rieko Kodama, she's been working ever since. She did art design. She was actually lead designer, overall designer for Phantasy Star 4, which is probably the second most beloved game in the series.
Yeah.
And she did art design for Phantasy Star 2 as well.
Mm-hmm.
Spellcaster and Mystic Defender.
Oh my god.
Yeah, Mike and I are nodding, but we know, right? And she was lead designer later on for Skies of Arcadia.
Oh, yeah.
And so
another sort of
I know, right?
offbeat setting for an RPG for Sky Pirates.
Exactly.
Positive and colorful and colorful cast of characters and just Skies of Arcadia. I mean, I remember when Skies of Arcadia came out. Even people knew, they knew the people behind it. It was very obvious. Oh man, it's people behind Phantasy Star that are behind this, and it was obvious. But even if no one had said that, it was so obvious. Writing was on the wall. You saw Skies of Arcadia, you were like, it's the same vibe. It's the same feeling. It's the same magic.
And Skies of Arcadia as well, one of those beloved games, right? For that reason, just colorful, poppy, positive. I mean, I don't play games to feel like shit, man.
Me neither.
You know what I mean?
Me neither. Well, sometimes. But
the Resident Evil.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, wait. That's to feel like shitting.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So moving on to Tokuhiko Uwabo. known as Bo.
Yes.
Bo.
Classic.
And for me, Bo, as a kid, I first saw his name in the Space Harrier credits, which also was the first time I ever saw closing credits in a video game. Blew me away. And I just remember music design. Bo. And and I was like, that's so cool. I wonder who Bo is. And, man, he is not an easy guy to find details about, let me tell you.
I think we talked about this before, didn't we? Like, people in video we were talking, I think it was the Advance Wars episode where, like, people in video games are, like, some of the few people that, like, you can follow them up to a point and then they just fall off the face of the earth.
Yes.
Completely.
Yes. That actually happens with Phantasy Star 2 with Chieko Aoki. Who did the story and script. She left Sega because she got married. That's it. She got married. And it's like, all right, I guess I'm done with video games. I'm going to go be a wife. And like that, you know what I mean? It's weird. And, I think it was Bo who eventually left to become a venture capitalist investor. Like,
what?
I know, right? It's so weird.
Amazing.
Yeah, I think it's him. I could be wrong.
I sometimes wonder, like, how those meetings go. Like, what does his CV look like?
Like, says here you compose.
Yeah, I know, right?
For games?
For Phantasy Star? Oh, hell yeah! Welcome aboard.
Hire this man.
Great game. It's like here's your seed capital. It's like, what's the venture? A new Phantasy Star? No? All right. Refused.
I wonder if anybody has ever been like, I was more of a Dragon Quest kid, so, don't call us, we'll call you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Bo, was the composer for Alex Kidd in Miracle World and tons of other Sega games. But to me, once I found out that he composed that first level music for Alex Kidd in Miracle World, one of, to me, the catchiest earworms ever. Mike's giving me this, like, kind of like grimace.
It's like, it's earworm is a great way to put it.
Yeah.
I was just going to put it that way. It's a great way to put it.
You don't want it there, but it's just there.
It's there, man.
Also composer for Zillion, Space Harrier, Woody Pop, Sorcerian on the Mega Drive. And he also worked with Yuzo Koshiro as part of Falcom's sound team JDK, in composing Ys 1 and 2, which I didn't know. I didn't know he was on JDK or worked with Koshiro until I did, the research for this episode. That's the coolest friggin' thing.
Yeah.
Also worked with, Yuzo Koshiro on the Revenge of Shinobi soundtrack.
Amazing.
To me, one of the all-time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Although it should be noted, neither one of them is responsible for the TurboGrafx CD remake of Ys 1 and 2, which is where the music went from good to legendary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other two women who were working on the team, which was more than typical for a game development team at the time, I already mentioned Chieko Aoki. Her nickname in the game was Otagami Chie, and the reason, which is translated as letter Chie, because she actually personally responded to fan letters. So fans would write her letters, and she would actually write back to them.
That's so cool.
Which is, I know,
greatest.
right?
That is amazing.
Well, it's also cool in the sense that, like, I feel like that's a thing that would never happen nowadays.
It couldn't.
Because I feel like aside from obviously, like, known people, like Hideo Kojima or something, like, there's so many people that work on games now that, like, I feel like it's almost impossible to be that one guy that people would even write fan mail to.
Yeah, and you don't, and look, I mean, there's something about writing the letter by hand that just kind of makes it just that much more special, and you won't get that today. You'll get emails, right? So yeah, a number of factors. This is definitely a cute product of the era, Otagami Chie. Miki Morimoto, she was responsible for the playtesting and enemy stats. And she makes an appearance in the game. Mike, I don't know if you remember this.
I remember this, but I didn't know. I didn't know this story, but I remember this person.
Yeah. Because later on in the game, you're going through a jail, and you open one of the cells, and there's a character in the cell named Miki. And Miki, while in jail, her top priority is asking you, "Hey, do you like Sega games?" And if you say yes, she'll be like, of course, Sega games are best.
Yeah. And if you say, but this is awesome because I know this part. If you say no, she basically, I'm not going to paraphrase it perfectly, but she basically goes, why the hell have you played it up until now then?
Yeah.
And she basically says that. It's incredible. I was like, it's so good. She's like, why would you do all this?
Yeah.
I was secretly hoping that you'd be like, and if you say no, she just like turns into a demon and is like a secret boss of the game.
Cool.
The game shuts off and you lose all your progress.
Yeah, it just deletes your save file.
But yeah, she famously is noted for being like, I don't know why I'm the only character that was put in jail. You know, like out of the people who are in the game. It's funny. She's responsible for the enemy stats. That also includes percentages for running away from enemies. So I didn't realize this until I actually read it. And now that I read it, it's like, yes.
Oh, of course.
This makes perfect sense. Later on in the game, the percentages from running from enemies drop way down.
Absolutely.
And it becomes very, very difficult to run from them. Mm-hmm. And there are some... Sorry, Arnie, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I'm very glad that you put this in here because when I started playing the game and I was like fighting, swarms and owlbears and stuff like that, I was running away like 100% of the time. Like every time I hit run, it like immediately worked. And I was like, oh, is this just like, there's just an automatic run? Like it never fails. And then when I got to the dungeon, I immediately ran into a slime and I was dying. I was like, I got this. And I hit run. It was like, blocks your path. And I was like, what the fuck? Like that wasn't supposed to happen.
Yeah. And later on in the game, there are some mobs that are actually on paper more difficult than the final boss, Dark Force. Like if you run into a group of mammoths, like you're going to be in a fight and the percentages for running from mammoths, like I remember as a kid being terrified of that particular mob, like, and you just can't run. Like the percentages are so low. So yeah, it's funny that she's, kind of evil in this way.
And it was it's the feeling when your heart's sinking when you hit run and just says you can't escape.
And you can't escape. You're like, oh
no. And then it cycles through every enemy.
Every single
just
one.
Like, oh,
and you're taking beatings
well,
and there's that sound effect when you get hit.
Like, it's sort of deceptive in the way that you see one sprite, but it could be like up to 4 enemies.
Yeah.
There's, especially with the mammoths. I remember packs of mammoths.
Oh my god, they were
and it was just like,
disgusting.
Forget it, man.
I think we figured out why they put her in jail.
Yeah.
And one more here. I actually gave up on ever finding this guy until I did like a last ditch kind of like, deep dive on Google to look for him. So when I was a kid, like monster design, Chaotic Kaz.
Yeah.
And I remember as a kid being like, that's the coolest name ever. And he designed like some of the cool, like the dragons in this game.
Amazing.
Look incredible.
Amazing.
Like the way their backs are hunched over, like they can barely fit in the dungeon.
Yeah.
But they're so like, they're huge. Like, they're bigger than they actually are in the game.
Yeah. So
cool. This is Kazuyuki Shibata. And I just found this out last night. He was a prolific tabletop gamer. So he used some of those metal like Warhammer figurines as inspiration for some of the monsters in the game. Specifically the sorcerers. If you remember those particular enemies, the ones who shoot like those little fireballs out of their hands.
Yeah.
He got those designs from figurines, but he did the monster designs for the game, and the monster designs for the game. Look, I mean, they're objectively amazing.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to try to hide my bias here. Like the dragons are to this day some of the coolest dragons I've ever seen in a game. Not just the dragons you find in the dungeons, but when you fly from Baia Male to the air castle, and you have to fight that dragon in the sky, the golden. Oh my god, that dragon looks so cool, man.
Yeah.
The fact that the zombies attack by barfing on you, the mammoths hit you with their trunks. Like there's so much cool stuff, so many cool designs in the game. And, some of it obviously just inspired by mythology, Medusa's in the game. Manticores, and so on, right? So, I mean, it's not like he's coming up with all this stuff originally.
Yeah.
But, Chaotic Kaz, man, he put that flavor into it. Those enemies looked so cool.
They still look great. I mean, it really holds up.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy to think, like, as much as we've been talking about how Phantasy Star is so different from all the RPGs of the time, the monsters are kind of like the closest thing you're going to get to a typical RPG of that era. Like, stuff like zombies and sorcerers and stuff like that. But then it also mixes in, like we've already talked about, mermen, werebats, like crazy stuff. So that was really cool. I really enjoy, like, every time I run into an enemy, with the exception of like the green slimes or whatever, those are kind of boring. But everything else, I was like, oh, this thing looks so cool.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So yeah, that's your team. That's most of the team there behind Phantasy Star. And some of the cool little ideas and designs and stuff that went into the game. We're going to take another little break here, and when we come back, we'll touch really quickly on the legacy of the game and what it's left for us, sequels, and so on. So we'll be back in a second.
All right.
All right, and we're back. And so yeah, we'll just get into just sort of the legacy left by the game, the sequels. We'll touch on them really quickly. The sequels are such that I feel like perhaps we could do an episode where we do all three. Although, Phantasy Star 2 and 4 probably deserve their own. Phantasy Star 3 is actually pretty interesting too, in that the development was very strange, but it's not a good game. So Phantasy Star 2 comes out a couple years later, 1989. It was, for me, the reason to purchase a Sega Genesis.
Launch title.
Yeah, I was.
Oh wow, I did not.
It was
know that.
It was close to launch. It wasn't quite a launch title.
Oh, it wasn't. Oh, my bad.
Yeah, it was
Sorry.
close. Like,
I thought it was launch.
Yeah, the launch was like Altered Beast, Tommy Lasorda, 6 games.
Oh, okay.
Last Battle, Hokuto no Ken.
Oh,
yeah.
That game sucks.
Dude, that game's awful. But the sprites were huge.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So Phantasy Star 2 released shortly afterwards. Like I said, for me, it was the reason I bought a Genesis. I loved it. Phantasy Star 3 originally developed as a different game, and then they're like, you know what, let's put the Phantasy Star name on it and redo some of the designs. Phantasy Star 3 is sort of I would call it like the black sheep of the series. Yeah.
Very much.
Very different in feel, very dark. Phantasy Star 1, 2, and 4 are very colorful, kind of happy games, and 3 is a little bit strange.
Yep.
Phantasy Star 4, I believe, was released in 94. I could be wrong about this, but
sounds about right.
That was kind of like the return to form for the series, because you had Rieko Kodama leading the design. She, of course, as we said, responsible for most of the design of Phantasy Star 1. So you kind of get that feel back, that happiness, that color. Love Phantasy Star 4.
Phantasy Star 4 is incredible. Yeah.
So quick question, as somebody, as a novice to the Phantasy Star series, is it worth playing them all in order? Is there, like, are they all connected in that you have to play them that way, or would you skip any of them?
I would, I mean, just from what we've been talking about, I'd say you can safely skip 3. You could probably skip 2 as well. Like, the thing about 2 is that I played it when I was a kid and I loved it, and it was worth every minute that I played. Nowadays, though, it's a little bit more of a slog.
2 is, two is kind of a slog to get through if you're playing the original. I don't know if the Ages remake of it is a little more user friendly, but playing Phantasy Star 2 now is kind of tough. And it's, you can boil it down to one thing, walk speed. The walk speed in 2 is incredibly slow. The dungeons are massive. Some of the later dungeons are like 25 floors.
Yeah,
like,
and they are difficult. Like, if you don't have a walkthrough or a map, it's
a grind.
They are genuinely difficult, which as a kid, fantastic.
Yeah,
I loved how difficult the dungeons were. It's like on Dazorus at the end of the game.
Yeah.
But, and even some of those dams, like halfway through the game before you fight Ney first. Anyway.
So not to get into a huge tangent, but so is there not a continuing storyline through all 4 games? Is it
very
like
loose,
kind of Final Fantasy-ish, where it's each one's its own thing?
Yeah, it's very loose. Like Phantasy Star 2's opening starts with the main character having visions of Alice fighting against Dark Force.
Yeah.
And
gotcha.
and that serves as kind of the foreshadowing, because Phantasy Star 2 takes place 1,000 years after the first one. You know, you still have your planets like you did in the first one, but they're wildly different.
Yep.
Gotcha.
And so, you know, you kind of have that Dark Force foreshadowing in the beginning where he's kind of responsible. He's kind of like the big bad who's making bad things happen. But that's about as close a tie-in as it is to the first one. Phantasy Star 3 is almost nothing.
There are some ties in 3, but it feels, when you have the added context that it was originally going to be developed as something separate, it makes a lot more sense how it feels. Not tacked on. I mean, no, it does. Like, it feels a little tacked on, like, with how it happens. I mean, 3 is still interesting because of the generation system, and they do some cool little things with music motifs.
Yes, yes, they do.
In 4, there's a really... 4 is for the fans. Like, 4 is absolutely a love letter. It's a thank you. It's a love letter to the original game, and it's because there's moments in 4 that it's like, you know, you're redoing things that evoke the first game in it. But more importantly, there's literally, I mean, it's not really a spoiler because it doesn't have anything to do with the actual plot or story, but you visit a town that worships Alice in 4.
Yeah,
you go to a town that has a statue of Alice, and they kind of venerate. I mean, I say worship. I don't mean they venerate it necessarily like a god, but they're like, this is our savior. And it's this, and again, they don't really make a big deal out of it. Like, it's just like, okay, there it is. And it's this really lovely kind of subtle touch to go, hey man, like, you know, to the fans to go like, hey, we remember and we love this game too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say 4 is worth playing. Like,
absolutely.
I mean, you know, especially if you're a fan of the first, if you've played the first, if you enjoyed it, you'll get more mileage out of 4. As a standalone game, 4 is still, I think, really good. And, you know, let me put it to you this way. If you can go back to Final Fantasy 2 and Final Fantasy 3, or 4 and 6, if you want to call them that, and you can enjoy them today, then you will have the same kind of mileage out of Phantasy Star 4. If you can't go back to Final Fantasy 4 and 6, if you're like, you know what, this is too old, this is too dated, I can't do it, then don't go back to Phantasy Star 4 either, right? Like,
I mean, my personal opinion is Phantasy Star 4, as much as I love 1, and I think it's quote unquote more important, Phantasy Star 4 to me, in my opinion, is the most user friendly and easiest to go back to of that generation of role-playing games. It's incredible. Like, the plot moves incredibly quickly. It's explained really well. It's always really clear what you need to do. I mean, I hate to harp on it, but the walk speed is like really fast. It's perfect. Like, it's so user-friendly, and it's so quick to get into and pick up and play. I mean, I recommend it. Like, if someone came up to me and were like, hey man, like, I kind of want to check out like a 16-bit RPG or something, but I really don't want to do a slog, I'd be like, you just play that. Play that. Yeah. Like, but it's tricky, because if someone asked me, well, if I only played one Phantasy Star, which one? I'd be like, that's hard. That's hard, because 4 is incredibly user friendly, and, you know, it's 16-bit, but 1 is just there's nothing like it.
And,
you know?
and 1 is short.
Yeah.
Like, especially if you have a walkthrough, it's not going to take you more than 12 hours.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The walkthrough that I have is like a page long. And so I'm like, seeing you guys talk about all the stuff that you guys remember and like experienced, and like all the things that happen, I'm like, how did all this happen in this like tiny amount of time?
No, it's amazing, dude. Yep. And so very quickly here, also Phantasy Star Generation 1 released on the PS2, which is an actual full overhaul of Phantasy Star 1. I believe it does have an English translation now, fan translation, which I didn't know, and I have to hunt down now because
I'd love to play it. I've never played it.
Oh, dude, it looks so good.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, there's also a Phantasy Star Choose Your Own Adventure style book that was released in Japan.
Sick.
I know, right? They released a few of them. The first one is called Elisa's Adventure. In Japan, Alice is Elisa. And gotcha. So now that I know that exists, I want it. And
are they like expensive?
No idea, dude. I didn't do a search.
Oh, gotcha.
I did a search for the World of Phantasy Star Compendium, which was released in Japan shortly after Phantasy Star 4, and I found one on eBay, and it's at that magical $50 number where I'm like, I like this game, but do I like it that much? I don't know. Yeah, that's a tough one to bite on. And of course, most recently you have Sega Ages Phantasy Star on the Switch. Originally Ozzy was going to join us for this episode, but unfortunately he had to drop out at the last moment. But this is the one he's been playing, and I have yet to purchase it. I've been meaning to for months, and I just keep forgetting. But he says it's fantastic. It's the first Phantasy Star game with an auto mapping feature, which takes
the best thing ever.
it pretty much is. But like the give a shit level in this game is really high. Like it has all those extra touches. It has like a full monster compendium, full item compendium.
That's so cool.
I'm saying, amazing. Right? Yeah.
Well, and especially when you think of the fact that like you said, the give a shit level, extremely high. They could have just ported it to the Switch, as a straight port and been like, there you go.
Yeah,
and people would have bought it.
And people would have bought it.
Yeah.
But
the fact that they put the extra love in there is amazing.
Yeah, and there's interviews with the developers of the Sega Ages Switch version. And,
oh, nice.
Like reading through those interviews, man, there's love. Like, I say this a lot on the show, but like, oftentimes with a game, you can feel when there's love in the game, and it really affects the experience, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds silly, especially when I say it out loud and I hear myself, but like,
magic,
It's
magic, man.
It's very interesting to me looking in the way that, like, I don't want to make this sound like Sega's the only company that does this, but when you look back at how much love that company still has for even the original Phantasy Star, the fact that they keep re-releasing it, they keep putting it out there for people to play and experience. Because sometimes I feel like companies do collections and re-releases and stuff like that to capitalize on the popularity of a series and like try to get extra bucks.
Yeah.
But Phantasy Star sort of sits on this line, I feel like, where it's not popular enough that I feel like it would warrant a major company like Sega sort of giving it the push that I feel like it does give it.
Yeah.
And it's obviously got enough fans to where, like, it deserves that love. They put it every time they put out any sort of Genesis collection. There's always Phantasy Star on there. I think Sonic's Genesis collection on PS3, which is how I'm playing it, has all 4 of them.
Yep.
With Phantasy Star 1 being an unlockable that you have to unlock. But it does have 2, 3, and 4 on there. They've done the Sega Ages. They just ported the first one to Switch. I have to imagine that they're going to port at least 4 to Switch as well at some point. Yeah. So it's really cool seeing a company like, care about, its history like that.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely cool. It's nice that they add all these extra touches. It just, it makes the experience worth that much more. I mean, I know these games are only like, $10, $12 or whatever the case may be, but like, and it's not that much money. I get it. Right? Like, I spend that much on a fucking Big Mac and fries. And I get way less out of those.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
But at the same time, it's still nice that when you're plunking money down on these games, that they give a little extra, that there's a little extra love. It feels much better.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll put it this way. Like, re-releasing Phantasy Star feels different to me than re-releasing Sonic the Hedgehog for like the 70 billionth time.
Yeah. Agree. What we need now is a Sonic Mania for Phantasy Star. That would be very interesting, but that's a whole other.
Man.
I mean, what we need now is that Miracle Warriors HD remake.
We heard you, Paul. We heard you, Malo, after your 1000th email. It's coming. You're like, yes! Finally!
The miracle is back!
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll wrap it up here. Mike, favorite character in Phantasy Star?
Okay, I mean, it's Alice.
Okay, yeah.
But I do want to bring out some interesting mentions, if I may.
You may.
So I'm just, you know what? I'm gonna get right into it. Odin, man. So I know you guys bleep this stuff out. All right. I know.
No, we don't.
Man, fuck Odin, man. So the beginning of the game, they're like, I've heard of a man with great strength named Odin. Every time I play it and every time I see it now, I'm like, piss off, man. That dude is a joke, you know, so first of all, he's like, I'm going after Medusa. Like, yo, Bright Eyes, man. First of all, y'all don't have a mirror shield. It's just gonna turn you to stone immediately, which is what happens.
Yeah.
All right. 2, you don't even have your Laconian axe yet, which you know you need to kill her. So I don't get that either. He's got Meow.
Yeah.
With the bottle of Alcalin.
Yeah.
Okay. To get him better. I mean, at least he thought forward. Like he thought forward enough to do that.
Yeah.
But you save him. And bro is he just whiffs, man.
He
misses all the time. Like, you're giving him this Laconian axe and it's just like whiff, whiff, whiff. And I'm like, yo, Odin, if you miss one more gun. All right, here's the laser gun.
That's it. Yeah.
Can't miss.
Can I be 100% honest with you?
Yeah.
When I first walked into the Medusa cave and I ran into the person who was stone.
Yeah.
I it did not even cross my mind that was Odin. I was like, oh, like, this is cool. It's like letting you know, like, if you fuck with Medusa, like, this is what happens.
Yeah,
you know? So I'm like, where the hell is this guy? Like, I've been looking everywhere. And then I look on the walkthrough and it's like, you need to get the thing to, like, make him not stone. And I'm like, this guy's the one who's supposed to be helping me.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, man. You get it. See, you get it, dude. I mean,
I was 100% on board.
He's the worst. Just give him the laser gun, then he can't miss. Does his thing. I mean, like,
the laser gun is 100% necessary.
Oh, the laser, yeah. It's dope. I mean, like, meow. Sorry. Meow is, I mean, I love thinking about the 4 of them together, right? Because Alice, you know, she's cool. Like, she's got armor, a shield, and a sword. You know, and then you got Odin, who's kind of like, looks like a linebacker with a laser gun.
Yeah.
Because he can't hit the broadside. He can't hit water if you fell out of a boat. And then Meow is there, who's just a cat, I think, wearing a coat with a knife in her teeth.
Yeah.
Right? And
That's
then,
amazing.
and then there's Noah, who, I don't know about you, but I give Noah 2 laser shields. Instead of having a 1, so they've got more protection. So it's just like, I'm just thinking of this awesome party walking into this dungeon. You got the cat, you got linebacker who can't hit, you got Alice who's cool, and she's kind of apologizing for the rest of them, and just like, yo, last thing, this is the best I could do. And Noah's got 2 shields. You know what I mean? Like, and like, anyway. So, but I think the other characters I kind of wanted to bring up. I love the homeless guy in the village who he asks you for a Coke.
Yes.
And if you give him a Coke, he just says, "Cool, thanks." And like all the other ones, if you give them a Coke, they tell you something. Like, they tell you a hint, but he's just like, "Cool, thanks, man." I was like, "Yo, all right, fair."
Help the less fortunate.
Yeah, I mean, we've already talked about the cake salesman. But I wanted to bring up Dr. Mad.
Dr. Mad, yes.
Who is, this professor in this cell. And it's so awesome. It like legit is awesome, like all kidding aside, because you meet him and he goes, "Hey, give me that cat." And if you say yes and give him Meow, Meow just dies.
And the text, I know, and the text box pops up and it's just, Meow dies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he fights you anyway.
Yeah.
And it was so shocking. Like, the first time we were like, we just did yes. And it's like, Meow's dead. We're like, what? And then like, so there was that, which I loved.
But like perma-dead? Like, you can't.
No. You can resurrect her at the church.
But,
yeah.
Oh my God.
But, and the only other thing I wanted to mention, special shout out to the Dazorian town that always lies.
Dude. How many hours as a kid did I waste Yeah, there's on Dezoris, there's a village where the Dezorians tell the truth and a village where they lie. And the ones who lie to you give you all these fake clues on where to find stuff.
Yeah.
But you don't know if they're telling the truth or not. So like you go on these wild goose chases for like torches and crystals, and it's like, why am I not finding these things? Damn it.
That's awesome.
Hey, so Meow, male or female?
I defaulted to female.
Me too.
Same.
Yeah, okay. We're all on the same page there.
Yeah.
And so for me, favorite character, it's a cross. Like Alice and Meow are like 1A and 1B for me.
True.
I just love them as a kid.
That's a good point.
Cause like to me, they're always just together.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They're best friends, girl and her trusty.
Well, Meow is
attack
the
cat.
first party member you get.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And then later on, she becomes like this beautiful kind of cat beast, which is like the worst way to beautiful cat beast is like makes no sense at all. Like, I don't know where my words are. But yeah, she just, she metamorphosizes and it's really cool. Arnie, I know you've only like played the game for a few minutes here. Any kind of favorite characters or any other things you want to point out? Memories, like memorable moments rather?
Honestly, my favorite character wise, I defaulted to Meow. I thought Meow was dope.
Yeah.
Partially because it's like Mike was saying, it's just a cat. Like I was like, I feel like in a lot of other RPGs, it'd be like, I am the prince of, blah 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 kingdom who got transformed into a cat.
Yes,
look at me, I'm hilarious.
Hi, I'm
but
Chrono
Meow's
Trigger.
just like, nah, bish. Just a cat.
Yeah.
Like,
a cat with a knife
which also
in its mouth.
I meant to ask, like, can you equip Meow with like weapons and armor?
No.
No.
Okay.
Just, I mean, there are weapons, but there's only like 3 different ones.
There's two weapons. There's the Iron Fang and the Silver Fang.
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha.
You can equip her shield is called, I think, just gloves.
Yeah, I think so.
And there's like a thick fur for armor.
Yeah.
Because that was my thing too. Is like everybody's coming in here all weaponed out, and then there's just Meow just like hanging out and biting on mermen.
Yeah.
But I mean, other like I agree with you 100%, Paul. Like Alice is, Alice and Meow 1A 1B for sure. I haven't met Noah yet, so there's a chance that Noah turns it around for me. As far as memorable moments, like I think I've talked about everything. There's just so many, like, this is one of those games that I feel like people sometimes think when you talk about games like this that you're being disingenuous, especially when you're talking about old games.
Yeah.
But this is one of those games where I definitely have had like a number of, whoa, that's really cool moments. Like very kid, like, whoa, like I can't believe you could do this, but it really reminds me of like, when I was playing like some of my favorite games, like Persona 4 and stuff like that, where it's like, it's really cool that they thought ahead to be like, wouldn't it be cool if this happened? And then they did it.
Yeah.
And you get to experience that over and over again. But I mean, just the fact that this game, like the way it's just composed, like art direction, controls, character, story, like all that stuff is so well done that I think, I think a modern gamer could go back and play this and not feel like, not be stuck in the fact that like this feels old. Like it really doesn't. It still feels really good to play.
Yep. No, hey man, couldn't agree more. I'm gonna close things up. I'll give one memory from the game, and I know Mike is gonna flip when he hears this. So I can't even remember at what point in the game this happens exactly. But there's a point in the game where the party, they're in a town and they go to sleep. And, there's like the sleep kind of, blackout, whatever.
Yeah.
And then a monster pops up.
Yep.
And the monster has 255 HP.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa. No way.
And early in the game, you're fighting swarms and scorpions and they have like 8 HP and 12. Yeah. And this one has 255 HP. And I looked at it, and it's just a face in the middle of the screen, like a demon face in the middle of the screen, and it's called Succubus. And as a kid, I was like, oh my god. and I went and I changed my underwear, and I came back to fight it, and it just ruined my whole party. And I was like, oh my God, how am I ever going to beat this thing? And then you wake up and it was just a dream.
Yeah.
And it is such, to me, like, the game has so many memorable moments. That might be my favorite one. Because, like, it's just out of nowhere and it just completely makes you poop your pants.
Yep.
And it's foreshadowing for who the final boss is going to be. I didn't put it together at the time, but when you fight Dark Force at the end of the game, that's the other thing about this game. It doesn't show Dark Force's HP.
No. Every
other enemy, including Lassic, it shows their HP. Dark Force, you're like, oh my God, how do I beat this thing?
Yeah, you just keep going.
Yeah, but the Succubus is what kind of gives you the clue. He's got 255.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, as a kid, I didn't put that together. It was just like, oh my God, this thing's going to ruin me.
That's awesome.
The text literally is, you had a bad dream. That's all it says. When you come back, it says, you had a bad dream.
The worst fucking
understatement of the century.
It is. It's this weird anticlimactic moment because your heart's racing. And you're like, I'm dead? Am I dead? And it just goes, you had a bad dream. Yeah. And it's like, okay, keep going on your adventure now.
Yeah, adventure
and you're like,
away.
wait, what? Like, what? I gotta fight, what? And I think, it foreshadows it. I love it because it foreshadows it in more ways than one, because where you encounter where you have the nightmare is where,
Oh, like is it really? I don't remember that.
That's where it where it happens later.
Cool.
And it's just like, so there's all these cool little things that the game does. And, for me, other than the memory I already shared, getting to the top of whatever, getting to the top, seeing the sky for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
And then getting the feeling of like, oh my God, we made it. Like, we made it. Like, we're at the top. And then, is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
But other than that, just lots of memories of running over and over again, praying that I don't run into something, running through a dungeon. Okay.
Also, big shout out to the healing items being burgers and colas.
Yes.
Which is a thing that I feel like, and I could be wrong, but personally for me, I feel like that's a thing that Earthbound gets a lot of credit for a lot of the times, is like, this is the RPG where like, the weapons were normal stuff, and like, you heal by eating hamburgers and pizza. And when it happened in Phantasy Star, I was like, burgers and cola, like, this is the future.
So easy.
All right, man. We're gonna wrap this up now. So as always, everyone, hey, thanks so much for listening. Again, if you enjoyed this episode, if you enjoy the show, please leave us a rating and a review, and tell a friend about how much you're enjoying listening to this. Thanks, Mike, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And, Arnie, we can find you, manning the Region Free Gamers page, yeah?
That's right. At Region Free Gamers, and on Twitter at Region Free Gamer, and YouTube Region Free Gamers. Anywhere, that you can think of to type that name, you'll probably find us.
I do have a correction, though. On Instagram, we are now Region Free Gamers Podcast.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
We are at Region Free Gamers Podcast. You're absolutely right. We figured after 30 plus episodes, it might be prudent to let people know that we do in fact do a podcast.
Yeah, it's hilarious. There's a guy on Instagram and he's like, "You guys are a podcast?" And we're like,
I had no idea.
Oh, that's a branding fail. And you can find me on Instagram as well. I'm Paul's_game room. Feel free to reach out to us. We love chatting. We love chatting games, or if you have any ideas for the show, we'd love to hear them. So yeah.
Do you want to plug anything, Mike?
I just want to say thanks again to you guys for letting me come on and talk about this stuff. And I know that this game is super near and dear to Paul, and it means a lot to him. And so to be able to talk about this with him and with you, Arnie, and just chat about this stuff, it means a lot. It's really cool. Thanks, guys.
Cool. Thank you. And thanks everyone for listening. Have a good one.